Please take your seats. We're going to start. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's good to have the room in silence waiting for me and not the other way around. Thank you. I'm very pleased to be chairing the session this afternoon to consider items 5, 6, and 7 of the agenda. I would like to thank Ms. Marina von Weissenberg of Finland for chairing in a very diligent way this morning's session. I'll give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce our first agenda item for this afternoon, item 5 on invasive alien species. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For item 5, the Secretariat prepared document SBSTTA-25/10, which contains a progress report on the activities undertaken by the Secretariat in response to paragraph 2, 9, and 12 of Decision 1527. The document therefore contains revised version of the annexes 1 to 6 to the same decision based on the results of the peer review and an online forum. The document also provides information on the activities of the Interagency Liaison Group on Invasive Alien Species and cooperation with other organizations. The subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in the document as well as the 6 annexes that have been prepared in response to requests made on paragraph 2 of Decision 1527. In addition, the subsidiary body also has before it information document SBSTTA-25/INF/3, which contains the report of the online forum on invasive alien species. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. So as you can see, this document has a lot of work behind. The document passed already through a peer review process and also an online forum for the different annexes. As explained by the Secretariat, I'd like to highlight that the document contains 6 annexes developed by the ad hoc technical expert group upon request from COP14 and were revised following a peer review, which led to the version that is now before you. Therefore, dear delegates, in considering this document, I ask you to consider this process to which they were produced, also considering that we have 6 annexes in addition to the draft recommendation. It will be important to be very clear about the part of the document on which you are commenting. This will help the audience to understand your comments and assist the Secretariat in their efforts to capture your comments. And I remind you to submit your written comments to, the statements at @cbd.int no later than 1 hour after close of the session. I also been asked by Secretariat to ensure accurate interpretation. We ask you to remove your headset from the microphone to avoid this noise. Speak close to the microphone and speak slowly at dictation speed. So with this, Now I open the floor for interventions on item 5. I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by Finland and Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Japan expresses its appreciation for the efforts made by the Secretariat to prepare this document. Japan attaches great importance to the international response to unintentionally introduced invasive alien species and considers the use of sanitary and phytosanitary methods and cooperation with relevant organizations to be effective. For this reason, we welcome the progress of related efforts in the interagency group on IAS. Japan is generally supportive for the proposed recommendation. We also welcome the IPBES thematic assessment report on IAS to be used to support the planning on IAS and the implementation of Target 6 of GBF. At the G7 Hiroshima Summit, which was organized this May in Japan, G7 members committed to enhance international cooperation on measures against invasive alien species and started to work on it. As the presidency, Japan is currently leading the consultation to develop a set of recommendations by G7 members with support from the Secretariat of CBD, IPBES Secretariat, and other experts, and IUCN. Japan would emphasize the importance of enhancing collaboration in various sectors toward minimizing the negative impacts caused by IAS, especially preventing invasion of unintentionally introduced IAS. And from this point of view, we would like to propose to add the sentence in the 4A in the recommendation about the strengthening of collaboration with tourism and trade group members. In the same respect, we would like to make some text changes to the end of a small I of 4B and add especially those that facilitate international and regional cooperation. Along with some other minor changes in its annexes, we will submit our comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. So we look forward for those changes. We have a very short recommendation with 4 paragraphs and then the annexes. And you know the annexes were already under a very deep review. Now I'll give the floor to Finland, followed by Turkey and Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Finland has 3 major issues to be raised here under this item 5. First, referring to the draft recommendations, it is important to endorse the elements of advice and voluntary guidance, the annexes 1 to 6. These annexes include significant additional information, advice and guidance to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, in particular its Target 6. Finland would like to highlight and underline the voluntary nature of all of these advice and guidance in the 6 annexes, as it is already clearly indicated and contained in the first paragraph in each annex. We support highlighting this voluntary aspect in the draft recommendations in paras 2 and 3, as it indicates that their application can be done in accordance with national circumstances. We suggest to keep additional modifications in the annexes as limited as possible to advance and speed up the approval of these annexes here at SBSTTA-25. Secondly, Finland highly appreciates the work done by IPBES concerning the invasive alien species issues. The summary for policymakers of the thematic assessment also provides crucial background information and further justification for the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and Target 6. The assessment is valuable and useful for all parties and stakeholders in implementation of the Target 6 at national level and needs to be highlighted in the draft recommendation. To reflect this, a new para to the COP 1 bis is proposed. We also propose a new para or 1 ter to encourage parties and others to make use of this IPBES assessment. Thirdly and lastly, awareness raising and understanding the threats of invasive alien species to biodiversity are key issues for combating the threats. We want to underline the need to promote awareness raising and to provide training, education and capacity building to widely use the annexes 1 to 6 and the IPBES report. For this, Finland proposes a new para in the recommendations to the COP as a 4b bis. We have modified the suggested recommendations accordingly and submitted our written comments to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Finland. So there's general support for the annexes, an invitation for not to open them, and also some concrete suggestions on the paragraphs of the recommendation, and highlighting the voluntary nature of these measures. Please take this in mind in the next interventions, please. So I now give the floor to Turkey, followed by Belgium and South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. According to the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, only one of the 4 elements in Aichi Target 9 has been accomplished, and we have only 7 years left to achieve the 6th target of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Considering the relatively short time remaining to achieve Target 6, the annexes should be in line with Target 6 and its elements in the GBF. Preventing the introduction of an invasive alien species is the most cost-effective way to combat EAS. Prevention and prioritization are crucial elements of Target 6. Therefore, annexes should be focused on identifying and managing pathways to prevent their introduction and establishment. Annexes could provide more detailed guidance on what parties should do in this regard. In order for Target 6 to be accomplished, the annexes should be further improved to include technical guides that can directly be implemented by the parties. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. Now give the floor to Belgium, followed by South Africa and Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Belgium thanks the CBD Acting Executive Secretary and the CBD Secretariat for the excellent work on the preparation of Note CBD/Substa/25/10, together with all the experts and organizations that contributed to the work. We support a recommendation to COP16 to endorse Annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guideline and advice on various matters related to invasive alien species, to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and we support Finland's suggested addition of a paragraph on the key messages of the IPBES invasive alien species assessment. As we appreciate the extensive work that has been done on the advice and voluntary guidelines in the annexes, we are ready to accept these as presented, again, as suggested by Finland. Nevertheless, if this were not to be the case, we would have a number of clarifying suggestions and a few additions to the content of the voluntary guidance and advice in the annexes, in particular Annex 6, and we have some similar suggestions on the draft recommendations, and will submit, or at least we have submitted these in writing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. So if I understand well, you are in one hand open to accept annexes as they are without opening. If we open the annexes, probably you will have many comments. But in principle, you can leave as it is, bearing in mind that these annexes already passed through peer review, an online forum, and work even from last Substa meeting as well. Thank you so much. Now I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Germany and Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa delivers the statement on behalf of the Africa Group. The Africa Group would like to appreciate the effort in the preparation of the note by the Secretariat on this agenda item and the process of the ad hoc technical expert group on invasive alien species. On Annex 1, Africa supports the proposed methodologies, and we believe African countries could benefit from the methodologies as they are highly impacted by invasive alien species. On Annex 2, the group notes the compounding effect that climate change has on other global change issues, hence the need to assess the impact of climate change on invasive alien species in order to understand the future trajectories and implement appropriate response measures. On Annex 3, the group believes that risk analysis for alien taxa is a comprehensive process used to determine the level of risk associated with individual species, and therefore the proposed measures in Annex 4 are welcome. On Annex 5, the group understands the need to promote information access through international databases, but is of the view that should be done while recognizing the importance of the protection of indigenous and traditional knowledge. The group also welcomes the measures highlighted in Annex 6 on additional advice and technical guidance on invasive alien species. Mr. Chair, on the draft recommendation, the Africa Group values a regional approach at both intergovernmental level and scientific or technical level when it comes to issues of invasive alien species. This is based on our experience from the IPBES assessment, where Africa was underrepresented in the assessments due to data availability challenges. This highlights the different capacity levels in different regional groupings, which call for targeted capacity initiative to strengthen regional capacities. It is our view that a regional approach would help address such regional differences. For that reason, Africa calls for regional initiatives on invasive alien species to address critical issues like data and capacity in scientific and technological aspects. Africa appreciates an open-ended forum as proposed in the recommendations. However, the group is of the view that such a forum should be supplemented by other engagement modalities that will allow inclusive, effective, and efficient participation from all regions, especially Africa. For that reason, the group calls for other means of engagement, including face-to-face consultations. The group also notes the reference to the One Health approach under the proposed open-ended forum to facilitate the exchange of information on approaches that can be used to facilitate a collaborative response to the threats and impacts of biological invasions, and how those individual approaches could be integrated into the One Health approach. This group believes that there is a gap in the relationship between the One Health approach and other biological approaches aimed at the management of invasive alien species, especially in Africa. It is therefore important to understand how these two relate. We will be submitting our written contributions on this agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. On behalf of African states, I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by Switzerland and Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Germany would like to thank the Executive Secretary for the organization of the peer review process, including the open-ended online forum on Annexes 1 to 6. We welcome the preparation of the present peer-reviewed Annexes 1 to 6, which now provide important advice and voluntary guidance to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal GBF, in particular its Target 6 as well as other relevant targets. We support the content of the annexes and hope that they will be recommended for adoption during SBSTTA-25. We remain committed to maintaining scientific rigorousness, and we encourage to continue and strengthen collaboration between the CBD Executive Secretary and the IPBES, which in our view may strengthen, highlight and support the work and outputs carried out by each of the bodies. In this view, we would like to underline once more the outstanding scientific work, the dedication and the great efforts by the leading authors and co-authors of the thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control, and of the summary for policymakers, which has been approved earlier this year. We are confident that the adoption of the Annexes 1 to 6 will contribute to further improve our knowledge on invasive alien species, as well as our management actions to minimize their impacts. We will hand in some small comments on the recommendations in writing, and we agree with what was said by Finland and Belgium on the voluntary nature and that the annexes should not be opened again, but if it is necessary, that changes on the annexes should be as limited as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I still hearing support for annexes as they are. and some amendments to recommendations so far. Now I'll give the floor to Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada. No, Switzerland, sorry. Yeah, you already talked.
Thank you, Chair.
Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada. Sorry.
Switzerland is here, Mr. Chair. I think you skipped us with Germany. But as I have the floor, I'll carry on if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please, Switzerland. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Switzerland welcomes the summary for policymaker of the thematic assessment on invasive alien species approved by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services at its 10th session. Switzerland suggests highlighting the importance of the summary for policymaker by endorsing the publication and encouraging parties and relevant stakeholders to make use of the key messages when updating, revisioning, and implementing their MBSAPs. To this purpose, Switzerland, and similarly as Finland and Belgium, suggest the inclusion of 2 new paragraphs, 1 bis and 1/3, that was shortly submitted in writing. Furthermore, Switzerland thanks the ad hoc technical expert group for its work on the and the executive secretary for having organized a peer review process to solicit advice on annexes 1 to 6 to the decision 14/11, and welcomes the revision of said annexes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Thank you. Now it's Norway, followed by Gabon and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Norway supports the main points in the recommendation of this item. As Belgium and others, we think the annexes referred to in point 2 have now been sufficiently developed and updated in relation to the Kunming-Montreal framework and can be adopted without further changes. These documents, together with the assessment on invasive alien species from IPBES, will be a useful basis for efforts on Target 6 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. As regards point 4.4b, on an online forum linked to Target 6 of the framework, Norway would like to suggest that these discussions be more directly linked to the findings of the IPBES report and how these findings can contribute to the implementation of Target 6. This can be reflected through some small text revisions in point 4.4b, which we have submitted in writing to the Secretariats. Norway would also like to propose that based on the findings of the IPBES report, the parties could be encouraged to submit proposals on further measures to achieve Goal 6. The input could be made available before the online forum is arranged, and a summary of the submitted proposals, as well as the discussions in the online forum, should form the basis for discussions on further recommendations on measures to achieve Target 6 of the framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Gabon, followed by Canada and Spain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Gabon soutient la déclaration du groupe Afrique faite par l'Afrique du Sud. Il soutient également le projet de recommandation contenu dans le document CBD-Subsidiary 2510 et se félicite de la qualité du contenu des annexes à la dite recommandation. Compte tenu de leur caractère volontaire, il ne serait assurément pas nécessaire de rouvrir le débat sur les dites annexes. Monsieur le Président, les dites annexes relèvent particulièrement l'importance de disposer de coordonnées standardisées, actualisées et même de haute qualité. À ce titre, le Gabon pense que l'opérationnalisation de cette activité nécessite des financements à long terme. Et à juste titre, le Gabon pense que pour avoir des financements à long terme, cette nécessité de financement devait donc être reflétée dans le projet de recommandation. Par ailleurs, le Gabon réitère la nécessité de réaliser des évaluations d'impact sur l'ensemble des espèces exotiques envahissantes connues à ce jour. Cela permettra de fournir aux parties des informations détaillées visant à soutenir la hiérarchisation des espèces exotiques envahissantes conformément à la cible 6. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Gabon. Canada, followed by Spain and New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Canada supports welcoming the IPBES thematic assessment of invasive species and their control and its summary for policymakers, as well as the associated recommendations that can be found under Agenda Item 4. Canada supports bringing all or some of the recommendations from Item 4 into this agenda item. Canada appreciates the work that has been undertaken by the Executive Secretary with the Interagency Liaison Group on IAS on the annexes and supports the voluntary guidance. Overall, we are very pleased with the review process and the changes that have been made. If the annexes are opened, we could propose a few changes, but again, we are pleased with the text and support it. We support it being presented to COP16 for adoption. Canada also supports the Executive Secretary continuing to enhance collaboration with other international organizations through the Interagency Liaison Group. Canada would support adding references to the findings of the IPBES thematic assessment of IAS as the group pursues its assessment of existing capacity and scientific and technical needs. Furthermore, Canada would support referencing work the group is already planning to do on a draft proposal to the Economic and Social Council's Subcommittee of Experts on the Transport of Dangerous Goods on a globally harmonized labeling system for consignments of environmentally hazardous living organisms or propagules. Finally, with regards to the open-ended online fora proposed, Canada wants to avoid the duplication of work and believes that work carried out towards the implementation of Target 6 is better suited under the existing work laid out for SBI. Canada can be flexible on the other forum or alternative ways to share information amongst parties and organizations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Spain, followed by New Zealand and Brazil.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. España acoge con satisfacción la información proporcionada en el documento CBD-SABSTA-20/10 y con el fin de apoyar la implementación del Marco Global de Biodiversidad, respalda la recomendación relativa a la aprobación durante la COP16 de la versión revisada de los anejos 1 a 6 relativos a la guía y asesoramiento voluntario sobre diversos asuntos relacionados con especies exóticas invasoras. No obstante, de cara a proporcionar una orientación más clara y completa, España sugiere varias enmiendas tanto al proyecto de recomendaciones como al contenido de los propios anejos 1 a 6. Entre ellas, la inclusión de algunos mensajes que estaban presentes en los anejos 1 a 6 en la decisión de la COP 1527, pero que posteriormente fueron eliminados, así como de otros mensajes propuestos durante el foro en línea que no fueron finalmente recogidos en el nuevo borrador de dichos anejos. España propone además algunos cambios destinados a armonizar la terminología de los anejos 1 a 6 con la de la evaluación temática de IPBES sobre especies exóticas invasoras y su control, a reforzar los vínculos entre la orientación voluntaria proporcionada en los anejos y la implementación de la Meta 6 del Marco Global de Biodiversidad, y a subrayar, completar o definir mejor algunos de los mensajes más relevantes de estas orientaciones. La propuesta concreta de enmiendas la hemos remitido por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, España. Hasta ahorita he escuchado en general apoyo para no abrir los anexos. Entonces necesito el apoyo de ustedes para saber cómo proceder, tomando en cuenta que han sido profundamente revisados. He escuchado opiniones a favor de no entrar al detalle. Ahorita tengo casi 30 solicitudes más para la palabra. Esto quiero que lo tomen en cuenta para si es para apoyar lo que ya se ha hablado, los invito a ser muy breves y seguir escuchando para tomar una decisión sobre cómo avanzar. Gracias. Doy la palabra a Nueva Zelanda, seguido de Brasil y el Reino Unido.
Thank you, Chair. As the greatest threat we face to our biodiversity, Aotearoa New Zealand places great importance on strengthening biosecurity and tackling established invasive species. We warmly welcome the IPBES thematic assessment on this topic and take particular note of the recommendations around the ambitious progress that can be achieved through closer collaboration and coordination on invasive alien species across countries and sectors. New Zealand considers alignment of strategic actions and policies, information sharing and international collaboration in innovation, research and development is key to achieving Target 6. This needs to address existing problems and also prepare for future challenges likely to emerge alongside global megatrends such as climate change, under which harmful invasive species like the yellow crazy ant have increasing opportunities to extend their ranges. International initiatives that bring together funders, policymakers and research providers support the development of solutions that can transcend national boundaries and circumstances, supporting capacity building and driving innovation. The assessment summary notes that international and regional partnerships can also help to improve management of biological invasions, and here we emphasise that collaboration and co-development with Indigenous peoples and local communities can increase the effectiveness of implemented strategies. As with others in the Pacific region, New Zealand is acutely aware of the profound impacts of invasive alien species have on social and cultural values, including contributing to inequity through disproportionate impacts on Indigenous and vulnerable people. Understanding and demonstrating the social and cultural value of biodiversity supports us to prioritise efforts to achieve Target 6 to deliver the greatest benefits to both nature and people. There are several references within these annexes on the use and collection of traditional knowledge. These terms can have extractive connotations, which creates uncertainty around who is using the knowledge and what it may be used for. It also raises questions around the role that Indigenous peoples and local communities may be playing in decision-making processes around the use of that knowledge. Should the annexes be opened, it would be our preference that we could use language that empowers Indigenous peoples and local communities to participate in the decision-making process and contribute their knowledge where they feel it is most appropriate. New Zealand has some proposed minor text amendments to reflect this preference and will provide in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisila. I'll give the floor to Brazil, followed by UK and Sweden.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the work done on further implementation of Target 6 on invasive alien species. We understand some elements within the annexes still require improvement, and we would highlight that the peer review process does not replace the need for party and consensus-driven discussions. We support measures related to the sharing of information, communication, and dissemination of information as essential to further advance in the work in this area. On the maintenance of efficient, timely, and high-quality, up-to-date, standardized data and information for the management of invasive alien species. We strongly support the need for knowledge and data sharing to be free and open-sourced and to overcome language and cultural barriers, taking into consideration the specific needs of developing parties and challenges in having access to information. On the draft recommendation for the COP, we are ready to welcome the IPBES thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control. As for the elements of guidance developed on the basis of the work of the ad hoc technical expert group, we believe the text should clearly indicate that they are voluntary in nature and must be implemented in accordance with relevant international obligations, in particular those provided by the World Trade Organization. On Annex 1, we would firstly indicate Brazil has developed a list of priority invasive alien species for early detection and prevention based on a multi-criteria analysis. Therefore, we recognize the benefits of the approach. Nevertheless, We are of the view that a cost-benefit analysis based on monetary values is not adequate, given that current methodologies are not well developed and would not lead to an accurate evaluation. We believe the cost-effectiveness analysis is a more appropriate approach. On Section 3 of the same annex, on further considerations for the management of invasive alien species, we are of the view that decisions and risk analysis should be based on science, while when possible, at the same time, consider indigenous knowledge systems. On Annex 2, on suggested actions for national and subnational authorities and border agencies, the establishment of mechanisms to address the risk associated with the introduction of alien species should be focused on e-commerce and done in cooperation with relevant organizations, instead of focusing on commodities of concern, which would either restrict the work or pose an additional challenge to ascertaining such focus. On stakeholders' engagement, we should not qualify or be overly prescriptive on which stakeholders should be involved. On suggested actions for relevant international organizations, bodies, or agreements, including standard-setting organizations, we are of the view that we should build upon the mentioned frameworks as the environmental impact classification for alien taxa. But we are not in a position to agree to the development of an international labeling system, given that it may lead to distortions in trade. On Annex 3, the application of modeling measures should be extended to all countries and not only developing countries. On climate change, we should include more precise language and references. Finally, on Axis 4, we should distinguish risk analysis from socioeconomic and cultural information, being these of a voluntary nature. In this sense, we believe the mentioning of the guidance on Article 26 is inadequate, and we will be making specific comments on that in the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I'll give the floor to UK, followed by Sweden and Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Secretariat, for producing this document which captures the progress made since COP14 on addressing the issue of invasive alien species. The UK is grateful to see the updated guidance featured in the annexes, and we were pleased to take part in the peer review process along with many other parties and observers. Firstly, in agreement with Finland and a number of other countries, we strongly support the annexes being endorsed in their current form, recognising the wealth of useful guidance and advice they contain, which parties can take forward and use when implementing their NBSAPs. We respectfully urge fellow parties to recognise that these annexes have undergone peer review and not to open the guidance for negotiations at this meeting. While we acknowledge the potential for further amendments, we believe that spending time on them will divert time better spent on more pressing agenda items that really do require our further discussion. Secondly, the draft decision presented in item 5 includes useful activities that will aid implementation of Target 6. The decision also welcomes the IPBES thematic assessment and recognises its importance in Target 6 implementation. We note that the draft decision in document 25.8 under item 4 on the review of findings from the IPBES thematic assessment also contains actions to aid Target 6 implementation and an encouragement to make use of the information contained in the thematic assessment. To efficiently address this overlap, we propose that the two decisions be combined into a single decision on invasive alien species. This one decision would become the basis for future work to support the implementation of Target 6, including embedding the further consideration and use of the IPBES findings in this work. To make progress at this present meeting, we propose that the Executive Secretary kindly prepare one draft decision that combines the two decisions currently found under items 4 and 5, and that they then present it to this meeting as a conference room paper for parties to consider. The UK has submitted a draft combined decision to illustrate how this could be formulated. We believe our proposed approach of combining all actions into one decision would outline a clear path forward for future work under the invasive alien species agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK, and thank you for your suggestions. So far, we've been considering IPBES in a package because there are similar ways to agree on the assessments. In the case of invasive species, there is this connection, but I'm not sure about the other ones. But let's be flexible and maybe also Secretariat can consider this point. But meanwhile, we're taking care of the work on the annexes and the recommendation as well. Now I'll give the floor to Sweden, followed by Netherlands and Iraq.
Thank you, Chair. Sweden takes note of the document SBSTTA-25/10. We welcome the results from the various initiatives carried out by the Secretariat regarding invasive alien species, such as the peer review of the annexes, and express our appreciation to the Secretariat for these activities. Sweden also welcomes the EPBES thematic assessment report on invasive species and their control, and its summary for policymakers. Sweden would like to see the key messages of the report as relevant for the implementation of the GBF, particularly Target 6, better reflected in the proposed recommendations for a decision, and makes some suggestions in writing. Sweden supports the recommendations for COP16, which proceed to endorse the revised annexes 1 through 6, advising on various matters related to invasive alien species, to support the implementation of the GBF. Sweden realizes the voluntary nature of the advice and voluntary guidance presented. Should annexes be opened, Sweden supports a new paragraph 4 bis to Annex 3 to address the emerging risk for the spread of invasive alien species via new global transport and shipping routes that may be established due to the impacts of climate change and the loss of permanent sea ice in the Arctic region. This suggestion will be submitted in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. Now I'll give the floor to Netherlands, followed by Iraq and Vanuatu.
Thank you very much for the floor, Mr. Chair. The Netherlands welcomes the publication of the EPBES report on invasive alien species and is in favor of endorsing its summary for policymakers for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as to invite parties and others to make use of these key messages of the summary for policymakers. The Netherlands supports the recommendation that foresees at COP16 the endorsement of the Annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guidance and advice on various matters related to the invasive alien species. Again, also to support the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. While the Netherlands supports the annexes in general, one issue has arisen and that really needs to be addressed. And this is referring to Annex 6. The Netherlands is of the opinion that the scope of the International Plant Protection Convention should not be expanded beyond its mandate, and that it's also not the mandate of the CBD to suggest this. Therefore, the Netherlands proposes a small change to paragraph 3b of Annex 6, and to add at the end, in line with the mandate of relevant conventions. The Netherlands underlines the importance of the precautionary approach and recognizes the importance of the One Health approach regarding biodiversity and invasive alien species, and appreciates that these are reflected in the documents. In line with Belgium, Finland, Canada, Germany, and others, if the annexes will be further discussed, the Netherlands will send in a few comments regarding Annex 1 and Annex 6 in writing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I'll give the floor to Iraq, followed by Vanuatu and France.
تحية طيبة. تماشيا مع المقرر 15/27 باستخدام قواعد البيانات والمشورة والإرشادات الإضافية لإدارة الأنواع الغريبة الغازية، وتشجيع الحكومات والمنظمات على وضع بوابات وطنية وإقليمية ودولية مفتوحة على الإنترنت لزيادة الوعي والتعاون وفهم التهديدات التي تشكلها الأنواع الغريبة الغازية على التنوع والنظم الإيكولوجية، وتقديم المساعدة العملية لتحديد الأنواع الغريبة الغازية وإدارتها، مع طلب مساعدة الجمهور بشكل عام والشعوب الأصلية والمحلية والنساء والشباب بشكل خاص بالإبلاغ عن التوغل المبكر أو التوطن أو الانتشار الأنواع الغريبة الغازية والسيطرة عليها وإدارتها وتسهيل تشخيصها ودراستها، خاصة القادرة على التوطن والانتشار والتكيف. لذا يتطلب الأمر دعم إنشاء نظم خبيرة Expert Systems أكثر تخصصاً ودقة وسهولة بلغات متعددة تقوم بتجميع واستخدام معلومات وخبرة خبراء وتوجيهات اتفاقيات البيئية والدراسات والتقارير العلمية من جميع أنحاء العالم، والذكاء الاصطناعي والتغذية الراجعة من المستخدمين في مجال إدارة الأنواع الغريبة الغازية، لنقل هذه الخبرات وما يحفظ الوقت والمال والجهد مع سهولة الاستخدام والتعديل والتحديث وتبادل المعلومات والمعارف التقليدية أو الإضافة أو الإصلاح لتحقيق الربط الشبكي بين المستخدمين الراغبين بالتعلم وتبادل الخبرات والمعارف والمعلومات وأفضل الممارسات وتشجيع الابتكار المحلي والعالمي في مجال إدارة الأنواع الغريبة الغازية واستخدام التغذية الراجعة من المستخدمين كأداة قيمة للتعرف على الثغرات وملئها وأداة تقييم جيدة واسعة النطاق لتقييم إمكانيات نجاح أو فشل الممارسات المستخدمة بإدارة الأنواع الغريبة الغازية. وشكرا.
Thank you, Iraq. Now I'll give the floor to Juanato, followed by France and Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Vanuatu is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries present here at SBSTTA-25, Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, and would like to align ourselves with New Zealand. Mr. Chair, invasive alien species are undoubtedly a serious threat to our islands with highly vulnerable ecosystems. They have a significant impact on our ecosystem's resilience, leading to a loss of production in ecosystem services and a reduced ability to adapt to climate change. As we speak, our people are suffering economic, cultural, nature loss, and spread of diseases from invasive species, in particular the coconut rhinoceros beetle, Miramia peltata, and rats.
Can you speak slower, please, for interpreters to follow you? Thank you.
Regional tracking of Pacific Island countries and territories have identified major gaps in scope and volume of management actions is currently underway. Mr. Chair, we would like the Secretariat to note the following. We welcome and support the recommendations under CBD-25/10 invasive alien species, as well as the IBES thematic assessment report on invasive alien species and their control. Pacific Island countries have limited technical, technological, and financial capacity to carry out early detection and rapid response to invasive species introductions. In this regard, we call on the Secretariat and organizations and other partners to work with us to develop these critical capacity needs. While we work on strengthening our border control measures, we would like to call on developed countries to strengthen their border controls while facilitating international trades to Pacific Islands. Prevention of introduction of IAS is the first in line of defense. We would like to request for the inclusion of nature-positive methods for controlling and managing the invasion of IAS. Mr. Chair, we believe that effective prevention measures depend on adequate and sustained funding, of which we feel there should be an additional paragraph D under recommendation 4 to reinforce the need for financial resources to support PIG's needs for capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, transfer of technology, monitoring, and so forth. Therefore, we have minor changes to the recommendations for parties to consider in line with Article 26 on financial resources. We will submit our changes to the text in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Juanat. Just to let you know, still about 20 parties asking for the floor. To be very precise in your comments, I hear a lot of support for recognition of IPBES assessment, some amendments to the recommendations, many comments to not to open the annexes, some indicating that if annexes are open, they have some comments, and also a reminder that these are voluntary guidance. This is my recollection so far. I'll keep listening to parties, and we need to allow also for observers. Please remind that we still have 2 more documents for this session, so I count with your support to be very concrete in order to take a decision in how to proceed with this document. Meanwhile, I'll give the floor to France, followed by Sudan and EU.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France salue le projet de recommandation, en particulier l'inclusion de considérations sur l'approche One Health, et remercie tout le travail sur les annexes. La France est très satisfaite avec le contenu de ces 6 annexes et, considérant tout le travail déjà réalisé, soutient la proposition de la Finlande pour pour l'adoption de ces annexes dans la version actuelle. Cependant, si ces annexes sont ouvertes, la France souhaiterait que certains éléments soient mieux reflétés. Nous souhaitons souligner l'importance de la recherche scientifique, pas uniquement pour enrichir les bases de données avec des listes d'espèces et leurs lieux d'occurrence, mais aussi pour continuer à augmenter nos connaissances sur les espèces exotiques envahissantes et leurs relations avec la biodiversité, et afin de mieux connaître les phénomènes de leur propagation et établissement. Il nous semble également important de soutenir la recherche scientifique pour mieux comprendre les résultats des stratégies de gestion que nous envisageons mettre en place pour atteindre la cible 6 du cadre mondial pour la biodiversité. Afin d'éviter des impacts négatifs sur la biodiversité provoqués par des actions de contrôle et éradication des espèces exotiques envahissantes, la France souhaiterait que la présence d'experts sur les espèces concernées soit mieux reflétée dans ces lignes directrices. Cela nous semble fondamental pour éviter des problèmes de confusion entre les espèces ciblées par ces actions et les espèces natives. L'évaluation mondiale de l'IPBES sur les espèces exotiques envahissantes a bien mis en évidence l'importance de la prévention pour contrôler les impacts des espèces exotiques envahissantes dans les milieux marins. Dans ce contexte, le développement d'une convention internationale sur l'encrassement biologique, les biofouling, est très important pour la France. Concernant les bases de données, la France souhaite aussi que l'importance de l'interopérabilité entre les bases existantes ainsi que l'importance de l'utilisation des standards internationaux soit mieux reflétée. Nous allons soumettre ces points par écrit au secrétariat. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you, France. Now I'll give the floor to Sudan, followed by EU and Malawi.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. السودان يدعم ما جاءت به جنوب أفريقيا نيابة عن أفريقيا، ونثمن جهود السكرتارية في إعداد الوثيقة المتعلقة بالأنواع القريبة القاسية، إذ إنها تعد أساساً علمياً لتنفيذ إطار كومون مونتريال، وندعم الطرق التي اتبعت في إجراء هذا التقييم. السيد الرئيس، إن المنطقة الأفريقية تعاني من الأنواع القريبة القاسية، وهي من أكبر مهددات التنوع البيولوجي في المنطقة، وتعتبر تحدياً كبيراً في المنطقة. ولفهم الأنواع القريبة القاسية أهمية بالغة لحماية التنوع البيولوجي ولصحة الحيوان والإنسان ولدعم الوقاية من المخاطر. إن وجود ثغرات في المعلومات والمعارف حول الأنواع القريبة القاسية يدعو لتعزيز التعاون الفني وإجراء البحوث لسد هذه الفجوات في المعلومات والمعارف، وهذا أيضاً يحتاج لبناء قدرات في هذا الصدد، حيث إن مساهمة المنطقة الأفريقية في هذا التقييم كانت ضئيلة جداً. شكراً السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Sudan. Now EU, followed by Malawi and Mexico.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union supports the endorsement of the Annexes 1 to 6 of the revised voluntary guidance and advice on various matters related to invasive alien species to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We remind of the voluntary nature of the advice and guidance in the 6 annexes. We would like to see a reference to the IPBES assessment on invasive species to be included in the draft decision on this matter. We have a number of suggestions for amendments to the proposed draft recommendation and also to the annexes if they will be discussed, in line with the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, available on the website of this meeting. We will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the brief intervention. Please, I invite you not to make comments on how important are invasive species. We've been working in the Convention with invasive species for years and years, and we have a small set of different activities reflect on the different annexes, so we're not departing from zero. I will appreciate if your comments go straight about the recommendations and the annexes. I count with your support. Now I'll give the floor to Malawi, followed by Mexico and Egypt.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would like to align itself with the statement made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. We welcome the draft recommendation on the IP-based thematic assessment report on invasive alien species. Malawi believes that the technical and scientific cooperation at both global, regional, and sub-regional level is very important in addressing issues of invasive alien species, and we have proposed additional paragraph to address this issue. We support the proposal made by Finland in relation to capacity building, communication, education, and public awareness. We have prepared a draft test on this in the additional paragraph, and also some new additional text to paragraph 4. With regards to 4B, we support what South Africa indicated in regards to supplementing the open-ended forum with other engagement modalities to enhance participation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Mexico, followed by Egypt and Morocco.
Gracias, señor presidente. México considera pertinente priorizar los análisis de riesgo y, cuando no sea posible, usar el análisis de riesgo rápido. Limitar los análisis de riesgo a su modalidad completa, tal como se sugiere en el documento, incluye considerar las consecuencias que no se dan usualmente durante la introducción, sino después del establecimiento y la dispersión de las especies exóticas invasoras. Coincidimos sobre la relevancia de las bases de datos y apoyamos que éstas deben ser, en medida de lo posible, estandarizadas para facilitar el intercambio de información que apoye el manejo de las especies exóticas invasoras. México está de acuerdo con las recomendaciones presentadas y en particular con las guías desarrolladas sobre las metodologías de análisis de la relación costo-beneficio, costo-eficacia y de criterios múltiples que mejor se aplican a la gestión de riesgos adicionales asociados al comercio electrónico transfronterizo de organismos vivos y sus efectos. Gestión de especies exóticas invasoras con relación a la prevención de los posibles riesgos planteados por el cambio climático, otros detonantes y factores. La continuidad de colaboración en este tema es crucial y nos sumamos al llamado para seguir trabajando con el Grupo de Enlace Interinstitucional sobre especies exóticas invasoras para apoyar la implementación de la Meta 6 del marco. México apoya lo dicho por Alemania y Reino Unido sobre no abrir los anexos, haciendo un llamado a nuestros colegas a considerar que son de aplicación y de carácter voluntario. Sobre nuestras recomendaciones específicas para el texto, las haremos llegar por escrito. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias, México. Now I'll give the floor to Egypt, followed by Morocco and Burundi.
Egypt fully supports statement given by South Africa on behalf of Africa at large. Mr. Chairman, CBD has a very long history that deal with invasive species. We have too many decisions, we have too many guidelines, we have too many educational, we have too many things. Are we going to continue talking and talking, whereas biological invasion is happening all the time until a disaster will happen, especially when it comes to the climate change? We urge all participants here not to open the floor for discussion, especially these annexes, because we will wait until COP17 and then we cannot report by 2030. So we have to be very careful. Certainly the advice and guidance with their own elements are very, very good, so we encourage people to make use of them. Mr. Chairman, we would like to support the statement given on by UK to combine the two decisions in one, to make it very, very simple. Otherwise, it will complicate the whole things. And I don't want to talk too much about welcoming and voluntary guidance and whatever, but certainly we agree with your vision not to open the floor. At the same time, all of the issues are very clear to us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Egypt. And I'll give the floor to Morocco, followed by Burundi.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Maroc supporte l'intervention de l'Afrique du Sud faite au nom du groupe africain. Nous avons pris bonne note des annexes du projet de décision et des méthodes et analyses qui en découlent, qui constituent dans l'ensemble des éléments d'orientation technique pour contrôler et gérer les espèces exotiques envahissantes dans plusieurs secteurs. À cet effet, et compte tenu du volume des annexes, le Maroc propose d'examiner la possibilité de regrouper l'ensemble des éléments d'orientation technique sous forme d'un guide à plusieurs entrées, ce qui facilitera bien évidemment l'appropriation des principaux éléments par les parties prenantes. Par ailleurs, nous estimons qu'il serait opportun de capitaliser dans le processus de travail en cours sur les résultats de la toute récente évaluation de l'IPES relative aux espèces exotiques envahissantes. D'autre part, le Maroc appuie fortement la proposition de convoquer un forum en ligne à composition non limitée afin de faciliter l'échange d'informations sur les résultats du travail accompli, mais également sur les différentes initiatives visant à lutter contre les maladies zoonotiques d'origine animale, causées principalement par des parasites et des espèces exotiques. Nous citons à titre d'exemple l'initiative Présode, dont le Maroc et plusieurs pays du continent africain sont déjà membres. Enfin, le Royaume du Maroc encourage davantage la coopération technique et scientifique comme moyen efficace de lutte contre les espèces exotiques envahissantes et estime qu'il est très important d'insister sur les voies d'appui à l'élaboration des stratégies nationales sur les espèces exotiques envahissantes et notamment sur le besoin de renforcer les capacités des institutions nationales en charge de cette thématique. Finalement, et comme il nous a été demandé lors de la session précédente, nous avions d'ores et déjà téléversé notre contribution sur la plateforme web consacrée à cet égard. Merci.
Thank you, Morocco. I'll give the floor to Burundi, followed by Seychelles.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Burundi soutient la déclaration du groupe africain sur les espèces exotiques envahissantes prononcée par l'Afrique du Sud. Le Burundi trouve très utile la note du secrétariat sur ce point à l'ordre du jour et félicite le groupe spécial d'experts techniques sur les espèces exotiques envahissantes sur le pas déjà franchi. En effet, nous constatons actuellement que les espèces exotiques envahissantes deviennent une menace sur les écosystèmes et la biodiversité et nous suggérons qu'il faut intégrer à l'annexe 4 des mesures efficaces basées sur une approche collaborative au lieu de mesures facultatives. Merci.
Thank you, Burundi. Now I'll give the floor to Seychelles, followed by Peru and Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. Seychelles supports the statement made by South Africa on behalf of Africa. We appreciate the effort of the Secretariat on the preparation of this document. Seychelles also welcomes the IPBES thematic assessment on invasive alien species, especially on the findings of the impacts of invasive alien species have on island ecosystem. Invasive alien species is one of the major causes of biodiversity loss for island ecosystems. This is why Seychelles welcomes the annexes. Annex 1, as we believe appropriate methodologies can provide effective management action towards invasive alien species. Annex 3 on the linkages between climate change, invasive species, and other global changes, and that due to vulnerabilities of island ecosystems to climate change, the prevention and management of invasive alien species can become a greater challenge. We understand that climate change modeling and foresight exercises can be useful. However, there is a need to build capacity to undertake these modeling exercises. And Annex 6 on additional advice and technical guidance on invasive alien species management, especially the management measures of specific pathways. Due to our high dependency on trade, it brings with it risks of possible new invasive species. Thus, the importance of international and regional cooperation to minimize the risk of the spread of invasive alien species. The draft recommendation is a good basis for discussion, but we would like to state that capacity building, technical, scientific cooperation, and technology transfer and financing are the main constraints, especially to small island developing states, to effectively prevent and manage the spread of invasive alien species. We will submit our written comments to this agenda item. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Seychelles. Now I'll give the floor to Peru, followed by Colombia.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Tengo el honor de hacer esta intervención en nombre de Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, México, Cuba, Venezuela, Antigua Barbuda y Perú. Damos bienvenida al documento 25/10 y apoyamos sus recomendaciones. Consideramos que los anexos presentados en el documento muestran las orientaciones importantes para el trabajo de las especies exóticas invasoras y su contribución al marco mundial. En este proceso, los países mencionados requerimos fortalecimiento de las capacidades técnicas y financieras, tanto a nivel institucional como regional y local. Y además resalto otros aspectos como la accesibilidad y la normalización de los formatos de los datos y de los análisis de las actividades de gestión de las especies exóticas invasoras, análisis de costo-beneficio y costo de efectividad, identificación y minimización de riesgos asociados con el comercio electrónico transfronterizo de organismos vivos y sus efectos, análisis de riesgos posibles, impactos negativos de las especies exóticas invasoras sobre los medios de vida o la salud de los territorios de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, y la posible afectación de sus valores socioeconómicos y culturales. Una gestión de especies exóticas invasoras y los riesgos asociados al cambio climático y a otros cambios globales. Instrumentos de gestión de información para el manejo de especies exóticas invasoras, especialmente el acceso a al acceso de los datos para la toma de decisiones basadas en evidencia. Asimismo, estimamos necesario implementar estrategias para promover compromisos con los sectores productivos frente a la gestión de las especies exóticas invasoras y aumentar la colaboración entre las partes, otros gobiernos, organizaciones pertinentes y todos los sectores relevantes vinculados al tema. Por último, teniendo en cuenta que uno de los posibles efectos del cambio climático son las invasiones biológicas, es importante promover que los hallazgos de la IPES en la evaluación de las especies exóticas invasoras y su control sean incorporados en medida que apliquen en las otras conversiones ambientales, en la búsqueda de la sinergia que permitan reducir los riesgos e impactos de las especies exóticas e invasoras. Como Perú, adicionalmente, resalto la importancia del trabajo de la Secretaría Ejecutiva para presentar una propuesta al Subcomité de Expertos en Transporte de Mercancías Peligrosas del Consejo Económico y Social de las Naciones Unidas, sobre un sistema de etiquetado mundial armonizado para los envíos de organismos vivos peligrosos para el medio ambiente y también su inclusión en el capítulo 2.9, clase 9 de las recomendaciones de las Naciones Unidas. Consideramos que será de mucha utilidad para la gestión de las especies exóticas invasoras. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias, Perú. Los invito a concentrarnos en las recomendaciones y si hay comentarios a los anexos, por favor. Colombia, aunque la participación anterior también hablaba en nombre de Colombia, pero adelante Colombia, seguido de Indonesia y Bangladesh.
Gracias, presidente. Sí, solamente adicionar a lo que ya mencionó Perú, quiero mencionar que que Colombia está trabajando en su Plan Nacional para la Prevención, Control y Manejo de las Especies Introducidas, Trasplantadas e Invasoras, y este proceso precisamente evidencia la necesidad de apoyo para el fortalecimiento de capacidades técnicas y financieras, como lo mencionó Perú en el pronunciamiento conjunto. En este sentido, solicitamos el acompañamiento técnico, científico y financiero para armonizar los elementos orientadores propuestos por el Grupo Especial de Expertos Técnicos sobre Especies Exóticas Invasoras. Adicionalmente, quisiera resaltar en Colombia la experiencia que tenemos con dos especies, pangasios hipotálmos y hipopótamos anfibios, dado que tenemos un avance en el conocimiento en materia de aplicación de análisis de riesgos, y también quedó con esta experiencia identificada la necesidad de generar alternativas mediante paquetes tecnológicos que brinden oportunidades a las comunidades involucradas con sistemas productivos no sostenibles. Los comentarios detallados, también Colombia tiene otros comentarios detallados que se enviarán a la Secretaría. Gracias.
Gracias. Doy la palabra a Indonesia, seguido de Bangladesh.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia would like to appreciate the work of Secretariat and also all experts in the AHTEC on this agenda item, and welcome the work of IPBS on the thematic assessment report on the invasive alien species. Indonesia also supports the endorsement of the Annexes 1 to 6 for the management of invasive alien species. In our views, IS management also necessitates regional collaboration with the other countries that also face similar challenges. Thus, we support regional approaches as also stressed in the annex. As the current presidency of the ASEAN, Indonesia is taking a lead role at the regional level to reduce the adverse impact of IS toward biodiversity through the initiation of the ASEAN Action Plan for IS Management, with support from ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. This plan outlines several priority areas for action and aims to promote a regional approach to managing invasive alien species that recognizes the interconnectedness of the region's ecosystem and the need for the coordinated response to prevent and introduction of spread of invasive alien species. By working together, ASEAN member countries can protect the region's biodiversity, environment, and economic development. We will submit our full intervention to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Terima kasih, Indonesia. Now I'll give the floor to Bangladesh, followed by Chile.
Thank you, Chair. Alien invasive species in all three ecosystems have been rightly identified as the direct drivers of biodiversity loss in GPF. From One Health perspective, AIS may also have potential impact on human health. We believe that early detection, eradication, and/or management in a coordinated manner is the best possible option that has been reflected here in this document. Bangladesh appreciates the outstanding work done by IPBES and believe that AIS assessment report of IPBES will be very helpful for AIS control and management. However, Bangladesh supports the comments of South Africa, Netherlands, and some other country. My specific comment to add on paragraph in Annex 2, Roman 1, under the headline, suggested actions for national and sub-national authorities and border agencies. The paragraph is country-specific on health joint plan of action in line with global joint plan of action adopted by quadripartite, including UNEP, would be a good option for the parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bangladesh. Now I'll give the floor to Chile, seguido de Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Invasive alien species are considered one of the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss, and the GBF, through its Target 6, give us the needed direction to move forward in management and policy, highlighting not only the mainlands, but also in priority areas such as islands ecosystems, a relevant context for the high endemisms that Chile presents or has. Chile has revised and supports the annex presented and appreciates the work developed through the online forum. Chile also supports what has been mentioned by many other parties about not opening the annexes for discussion. Chile would like also to thank and recognize the work developed and published by IPBES on the thematic assessment on invasive alien species. This assessment provides relevant recommendations for management and policies, coordination, research and innovation, and is an important support for the commitment of GBF Target 6. We support and invite other parties to accept and incorporate these recommendations in the future work and management. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gracias, Chile. Doy la palabra a Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. La Argentina agradece a la Secretaría la preparación del documento CBD-SBSTTA-25 sobre especies exóticas invasoras. Asimismo, agradece la labor del Grupo Especial de Expertos Técnicos sobre especies exóticas invasoras. La Argentina sugiere que la Convención tome nota de la contribución científica de la evaluación IPBES sobre especies exóticas invasoras y la información en apoyo de la labor sobre especies exóticas invasoras y el cumplimiento de la Meta 6 del marco. Asimismo, toma nota de los elementos de orientación elaborados sobre la base de la labor del Grupo Especial de Expertos Técnicos sobre especies exóticas invasoras. La Argentina considera necesario que las evaluaciones de riesgo respecto del impacto de las especies exóticas invasoras se realicen sobre la base de la ciencia, en conformidad con las reglas de la OMC, en particular del Acuerdo sobre la aplicación de las medidas sanitarias y fitosanitarias. En este sentido, sugiere la inclusión de la frase «basados en ciencia» luego de todas las menciones de análisis de riesgo. Por otro lado, en línea con lo establecido en el Convenio de Diversidad Biológica y en el marco mundial, se sugiere incluir en relación a la creación de capacidad una referencia explícita a los países en desarrollo. Por último, la Argentina cuenta con numerosos comentarios sobre los anexos que remitirá por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Argentina. Ahora doy la palabra al representante de IPLC, seguido de UICN y Mujeres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hold on. I speak on behalf of the IFB. The IFB is disappointed that there is no language in the main decision that mentions the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities, although their role in taking actions and the value of their traditional knowledge and their particular vulnerability is mentioned in the annexes. Given the reluctance to open the annex, we propose the following language to further elevate our role in risk analysis in the main recommendations, building on COP6 Decision 623 that introduced cultural issues into the definition of risk analysis in regards to invasive alien species. In Recommendation 2D on risk analysis, we propose adding at the end of the sentence, cultural values as contained in Annex 4, comma, including with the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we also support mentioning the summary for policymakers of the IPBES Thematic Assessment Report on IAS. We have uploaded proposals for small changes in the annexes and call for party support for any or all of them. And again, we look for party support for adding this including the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities in 2D. Thank you.
Thank you, IPLCs. I would like to see if there's any party supporting these amendments proposed. I see Gabon. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to IUCN, and last speaker, representative of women.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned under Agenda Item 4, IUCN very much welcomes the IPBES assessment on invasive alien species. In addition to the recommendations based on the findings of the assessment, IUCN invites parties to include the following: to develop or strengthen capacity for the early detection and rapid response to newly introduced alien species to prevent their establishment, and to enhance coordination at regional and international levels, making use of existing mechanisms where appropriate, to improve the management of pathways of introduction, capacity building and knowledge sharing. IUCN supports the proposed recommendation in Substa/25/10 and welcomes the revised guidance set out in Annexes 1 to 6. We urge parties, other governments and relevant organisations to make use of the voluntary guidance. Chair, as noted in the annexes, the need for efficient, timely and high-quality, up-to-date standardised data will be critical in supporting progress towards Target 6, and that long-term funding is needed to support their proper operation and maintenance. Finally, as a member of the Interagency Liaison Group, IUCN welcomes the reconvening of the group and would like to highlight the important role this cross-sectoral group can play in supporting the implementation of Target 6. We therefore support the request to collaborate with the group included in the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, IUCN. Last speaker now, Representative Women.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women's Caucus. Target 23 says that GBF should be implemented through a gender-responsive approach, and this item is around Target 6. The diverse provisions on CBD Substat 2510 should explicitly include and recognize indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth as decision makers and key agents of change, as well as holders of key knowledge. They should not merely serve as sources of information, but be integral and active participants in, as appropriate, all actions relevant to IAS. In parallel, indigenous peoples and local communities should be able to protect not only sacred spaces, but also their livelihoods, where they sustainably nurture biodiversity and harvest the benefits of biodiversity. For that, we suggest the concrete additions in document. In Annex 1, paragraph 3b, to add at the end of it, or the social, cultural, and environmental impacts to indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. Also in Annex 1, paragraph 6, to add at the end of it, women and youth. In Annex 4, both in paragraphs 5a and 5b, add women and youth after the reference to indigenous peoples and local communities. In Annex 4, risk analysis, in paragraph 3, after risk analysis, add and vulnerability analysis. And finally, in Annex 5, paragraph 6.1, add the word free after obtaining and before prior and informed consent. We kindly ask the Chair to ask parties to support for our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, women. Representative, I would like to ask first what is the appetite of the plenary in how to proceed, because suggestions made by last speaker are on the annexes. So I would like to know if the plenary would like to proceed to work on the different recommendations or suggestions to amend the recommendations part and not to open the annexes, or if there is a will to open the annexes for review. If that is the case, then we need to establish a contact group. If we limit, if some delegations can live with annexes as they are, in understanding that are voluntary guidance, and it's been a lot of work behind peer review, forum, and many work, we can proceed to work with the Secretariat to produce a CRP. So I would like to know if there is any objections to proceed with a CRP and not to open the annexes, if there is flexibility and parties can live with that. If there is an opposition for not opening the annexes, please raise your hand. So I don't see hands open. And if that is the case, I can ask, so I see Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's overall agreement on many of the elements, but still we could benefit from some discussion on that. We don't expect this discussion to be lengthy, but maybe a small contact group will be useful in this regard. We have quite a few suggestions that we'd like to add to enhance the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. So there is a suggestion to open the annexes in a contact group. If this is the case, and I hope you have better memory than me regarding what the representative of women asked, I would like to know that if it's open the discussion in the annexes, if is any party open to support the suggestions we heard from the women representative. Please raise your hand to see. I see one hand. I cannot see which party is. Yes, okay. Is Trinidad or? Yeah. Yeah, I see more than one hand. Thank you very much, parties. So if this is the case, I will establish a contact group to deal with alien invasive species, but please to be aware that to limit, right now Secretary will start working on the different amendments to the recommendations section, and then I invite you to really have minimal amendments, those that are absolutely necessary on the different annexes, considering that there is a lot of work on this. I mean, this is not a new item in our convention. I was taking a look on the web page. We have already 100 technical publications in the convention, and number one was on invasive species in 2001. So we have more than 20 years already working in the convention. So this is not new, and this is very specific in some issues, what we have in the different annexes. So with that in mind, please be very practical on to minimize the changes only to those points that are really essential. The contact group then will be chaired by Ms. Senka Barutanovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also by Jean Bruno from Gabon, our colleagues, bureau members, and the Secretary will inform us on the time and the route that this contact group can meet. Also, I'd like to take the opportunity for you to take a look on the non-papers that are already published in the website for monitoring frame for items 3A and 3B, right? For you to be prepared, because we're going to have an evening session for contact group on the monitoring framework. So with this, we close our deliberations on item 5. We still have 1.5 hours to finish item 6 and 7. I hope we can be more expeditious in our deliberations. So now we move to item 6 on sustainable wildlife management. I'll give the floor to Secretary to introduce item 6. I can give you a few seconds if you need to change documents or delegates.
Thank you, Chair. We're just completing our musical chairs and then we can get on with it. Thank you, Chair. For item 6, the Secretariat prepared document CBD/Substa/2025 SBSTTA-25/11, which contains an overview of other areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance, such as other geographical areas, species, and uses. The document was prepared pursuant to Decision 1523. The subsidiary body is invited to prepare draft recommendations along the lines outlined in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Now I open for interventions on this document. I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Finland and Japan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. South Africa is speaking on behalf of the African Group. Africa would like to start by indicating that sustainable use and management of wildlife forms part of our cultural identity, and our unique wildlife resources forms a greater part of Africa's economies, which strengthen livelihoods of many indigenous people and local communities. Hence, we welcome the note prepared by the Executive Secretary to serve as a basis for this discussion. Mr. Chair, in terms of identification of areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance, Africa believes that this task relates to the adopted voluntary guidance on wild meat sector, which focused on some areas of terrestrial, tropical, and subtropical habitat biomes and ecosystems, excluding freshwater and marine fishes. Africa also believes that the IP-based assessment on sustainable use of wild species has identified status and trends of the use of wild species in general, and this should serve as a basis for this task, and the identified areas should align with the relevant goals and targets of the GBF, in particular goals A, B, and targets 4, 5, and 9. Mr. Chair, in terms of the geographical scope of the anticipated complementary guidance, this could be broadened to all areas, but we may also focus on temperate zone habitats and freshwater and marine habitats. Regarding other uses, alongside the wild meat is the potential for other uses of wild animals, such as ecotourism, and the use of their bioproducts, such as the hides, skin, fats, and the bones. In terms of the species, it is important to note that there is a large array of uses of wild species. Therefore, this should include species that provide protein, such as plants, insects, and the species that provide other uses, such as food, medicine, cosmetics, building materials, as well as the fuel. Mr. Chair, paragraph 45 of the note prepared by the Executive Secretary provides a basis for identification of such area, and we have made our proposals in sub-paragraphs F and J, details of which are included in our written statement. Mr. Chair, in terms of consideration for future work under the Convention, Africa supports the 5 thematic objectives included in the 2023 to 2025 work plan of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management to support the implementation of the GBF, which have been provided in paragraph 48. However, Africa would like to request access to the full report of the workshop that produced these thematic objectives, as many of us are not participating in this platform. Mr. Chair, in conclusions, in terms of the draft recommendations, Africa noted 3 elements suggested and has proposed additional elements of the recommendation, including text proposal to the 3 already suggested elements, just to strengthen the work under this item. Africa would also like to suggest merging of some of the elements from the IP-based recommendations for item, especially 4B, into the program of work under sustainable wildlife management for better coordination. And in the interest of time, we will not read them, but they are included in our written statement already submitted. We are looking forward to engage further on those draft recommendation input. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Now we'll give the floor to Finland, followed by Japan and Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have two major issues to be raised here on this item 6. First, Finland would like to highlight that sustainable wildlife management is a broad and complex issue, having a crucial component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It has clear linkages to the goals A and B and targets 4, 5 and 9. Thus, Finland warmly welcomes all further complementary guidance that help parties to implement those goals and targets. This also relates to the topic 3C dealt with yesterday and should be looked at together with the request and gap analysis. For this, we also highly support welcoming the identification of areas that may require complementary guidance. Besides the relevant complementary guidance already listed, we think that this list needs to be reviewed and further completed. Referring to this, we would like to stress the importance for wider perspective. Also noting, for example, that wildlife tourism and wildlife watching is a rapidly growing industry, but sustainable wildlife tourism will benefit and add wildlife value to the local people and communities if well organized and sustainably implemented. This perspective would also benefit more comprehensive rules and guidance, and this is important to include in the discussion and then in the list. To finalize the list of areas that might require complementary guidance, Finland proposes a new text in the para 51b in the recommendations to the COP. Secondly, Finland appreciates highly the IPBES work done concerning the sustainable use of wild species. The thematic assessment provides crucial background information for the implementation of the GBF. Thus, Finland proposes a new para of 51b bis to take into account the 7 suggested policy actions or key elements under the work on sustainable wildlife management as identified by the IPBES thematic assessment. Finland proposes also with a new text of para 51c to prepare draft complementary guidance documents on those areas that will support the effective implementation of the GBF. We have modified the suggested recommendations accordingly, and we have submitted them already to the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Finland. Colleagues, just to let you know that I have more than 20 requests for the floor on this document that I believe is quite pretty straightforward, and still the document on climate change. I invite you to be very precise on the recommendations. We know sustainable use is also a very important issue. We've been dealing also with it for years. This is very precise. Otherwise, we will need to have a morning session in plenary instead of start working with contact groups. We have few days to finish all our works, and we should start contact groups as soon as possible, starting from tonight. So I hope in the rest of the time we have for this session, we can address both documents with your help. So let's be very precise on how to deal with this document to take a decision, please. Now I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by Turkey and Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Japan expresses its appreciation for the efforts made by the Secretariat to prepare the document. Japan generally supports the draft recommendation presented in the document. However, we have some comments and suggestions on the draft recommendations on the complementary guidance of C, small-scale fisheries, and D, bycatch. Japan understands the significance of sustainable small-scale fisheries because they contribute to local and global food security and also to livelihoods in coastal communities. Japan also recognizes the importance of minimizing bycatch of marine turtles, sharks, seabirds, and marine mammals. However, we should be mindful that there are already relevant guidelines and conservation management measures developed by FAO and other fishery regulatory bodies as described in paragraph 15 of the document. For example, the International Plan of Actions and other guidelines have been developed by FAO and already operationalized on these matters. In addition, there are conservation and management measures for sharks and resolutions on the conservation of marine turtles and mitigation the impact of seabirds, which are adopted in regional fisheries management organizations. Thus, Japan would like to suggest avoiding any duplications of work, considering the effective use of limited budget, time, and capacity of the Secretariat and parties. We consider it is critically important to develop and strengthen collaborative and complementary relationships with the relevant existing UN and other regulatory bodies, and make focused and coordinated effort to update existing guidance. We also believe the establishment of any new programs should be very carefully considered and strictly limited to the cases where critical gaps have been identified, and such gaps need to be filled from the viewpoint of the implementation of the GBF and achieve targets and goals in each country. Japan will submit our written comment on the recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Now Turkey, followed by Canada and Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are so pleased to see that sustainable wildlife management has been involved in the agenda of this meeting. We once more realized how important it is to keep the delicate balance between wildlife and humans due to the rapidly increasing rates of zoonotic diseases. It is important for national and international policies to prioritize the integration of practices in terms of sustainable wildlife and game management. Governments should update their policies to ensure alignment with the principles of wildlife and game management. In this regard, it is believed that the development of complementary guidance would be very beneficial for parties to achieve sustainable wildlife management. We, however, would like to emphasize that the complementary guidance regarding illegal hunting of terrestrial animals should not focus on particular species with low intrinsic rates of population increase, but on all terrestrial animals affected by poaching. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Turkey. I'll give the floor to Canada, followed by Australia and India.
Thank you, Chair. Canada welcomes the present document, and we note actions under this agenda item represent, as Finland noted, an important contribution to the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Canada thanks the Secretariat for their preparation of the document that addresses one aspect of Decision 15/23, that is, the need for the completion of the work mandated under Decision 14/7, including identifying other areas beyond the wild meat sector that may require complementary guidance. Decision 15/23 further requests the Executive Secretary to work with relevant actors and stakeholders and relevant multilateral environmental organizations, and Canada would welcome further information on how those collaborations and synergies were achieved. In this regard, Canada has questions on the basis of the list of areas which may require complementary guidance provided in paragraph 45. Currently, the source or analysis on which this list is based is unclear. We are also concerned that there is duplication of work should the CBD proceed to draft additional voluntary guidance with activities or guidance that already exists or may be underway in other international organizations such as the FAO or CITES. Rather, Canada would request the Secretariat to provide further explanation on the scope of the assessment undertaken to identify the list, and broadly, the outcomes of their collaboration with relevant actors, stakeholders, and relevant multilateral environmental organizations and competent intergovernmental organizations, and present this information to the SBSTA prior to making a recommendation to the COP. It would be premature to recommend the preparation of any draft complementary guidance without first assuring the Conference of the Parties that there would not be duplication with the work of other competent organizations. We have some specific text suggestions to reflect our views, which we will provide to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. We look forward to see your suggestions also. Now I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very brief.
Australia supports the joint work of the CBD Secretariat and the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, and we see that the remit of the CBD seems to be getting broader as we continue on, and therefore work must be prioritised to focus on the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, as we heard through discussions on item 3 issues yesterday. As such, Australia would like to see in paragraph 51C the inclusion of subject to the availability of resources to ensure appropriate prioritisation of efforts. We understand the importance of this work, but would seek to avoid duplication of efforts, as many of these issues are under the remit of other conventions and agreements, such as CITES. We will submit our proposed amendment directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. Now I'll give the floor to India, followed by Brazil and EU.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India acknowledges the fact that the voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector was applicable only to some areas of terrestrial, tropical and subtropical habitat, biomes and ecosystems, and this may have to be extended to other areas. India urges CBD Secretariat to continue close collaboration with the IBES Secretariat to have a holistic understanding of the implications of the IBES thematic assessment on the sustainable use of wild species for GBF implementation. Further, we urge CBD Secretariat to collaborate with all relevant actors and stakeholders to promote the mainstreaming of the sustainable use of biodiversity, in particular of wild species, into all relevant sectors. India also welcomes the reference to collaborating and enhancing synergies in the field of sustainable use of wildlife with the relevant multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. The targets 4, 5, 9 of GBF covers wildlife from various angles, converging to achieve sustainable wildlife management. Striking a balance between the sustainable use, trade of wildlife and simultaneously addressing overexploitation is a huge challenge. Inability to achieve success here would lead to biodiversity loss. While acknowledging and appreciating the work done by collaborative partnership on sustainable wildlife management in giving overview status of trends and possible future scenarios for sustainable wildlife management, we are of the view that unless holistic regulatory frameworks are put in place by the parties, the overexploitation of wildlife like fungi, cacti, cycads, orchids, medicinal plants, wild ornamental fish, recreational fishing may continue unabated. Lastly, India urges for the collecting required authentic data on collection harvesting of wild flora and fauna in different regions so as to have an updated picture to develop complementary guidance and also put in place regulatory framework by each party to the convention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Brazil, followed by EU and Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Chair. And Brazil takes note of document 25/11. From our perspective, the sustainable management of wildlife provides an opportunity to address the 3 objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner, and to enhance the visibility of the central role of groups in vulnerable situations in conservation, restoration, sustainable use, and management efforts. At the same time, we would like to express our deep concern regarding the analysis on areas that might require complementary guidance as presented in Section 3. Throughout the GBF negotiation process, we have consistently emphasized that the implementation of the Convention in its new framework is a party-driven process, not a Secretariat-driven process. Therefore, we do not believe that it is the role of the Secretariat to identify specific areas without proper and inclusive consultation with contracting parties. Bearing this in mind, we fear that the proposed areas place a disproportionate emphasis on the issue of overexploitation rather than identifying pathways to promote sustainable use, which was precisely an innovation from the IPBES Sustainable Use Assessment. We will not be in a position to accept paragraph 45.g on new technology that could result in sustainable practices. This topic provides an unbalanced understanding of the role of innovation and technology and neglect the benefits from technological innovations that are needed to improve the resilience of sustainable use across different sectors. Section D.1.4 of the SPM of the IPBES assessment, for instance, clearly recognizes the role of technological innovations to reduce waste. We further believe addressing all new technology developments is not consistent with the mandate of the Convention. On a similar vein, we are not convinced of the added value of Area 45.A on destructive logging, as we need more clarity on the consistency with the mandates of the UN Forum on Forests, the Committee on Forestry from FAO, and the International Organization for Tropical Timber. We further struggle to understand why some key topics of particular importance for developing countries that have been addressed by the IPBES assessment were not considered in the analysis by the Secretariat. In this regard, we draw attention to two specific topics that would benefit from further actions under the Convention: interlinkages between poverty alleviation strategies and policies and the sustainable use of wild species, and the social, economic, and environmental benefits of sustainable wild species-based products. Those actions would enhance the visibility of biodiversity within the 2030 Agenda and would contribute to addressing monitoring gaps related to Goal B and Target 9. In light of those concerns, we believe it would be premature to engage in the preparation of additional guidance, and the best way forward would be to invite contracting parties to a round of submissions on good practice for sustainable wildlife management. We once again would like to stress the importance of inclusivity and transparency in all the activities carried out by the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I'll give the floor to EU, followed by Saudi Arabia and Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. The European Union considers complementary guidance should only be developed for areas that are materially important for achieving the relevant targets of the GBF and for which there are no existing guidance. We identified several existing guidances that address the gaps identified in the Secretariat's assessments, at least partially. Once again, we should also keep in mind that guidances are only one of the possible tools, and we may well wish to prioritize other instruments to ensure full implementation of the elements in the GBF related to sustainable wildlife management. Hence, the European Union would like to support a subsidiary recommendation requesting further preparations on this issue in view of a solid decision at COP16. We are broadly supporting the suggestions included in the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, and we will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Now I'll give the floor to Saudi Arabia, followed by Belgium and Switzerland.
مساء الخير. فيما يخص الفقرة رقم 4 من التوصيات في الوثيقة 11 نؤكد على الحاجة الحقيقية إلى تحديد مناطق ومجالات قد تشمل أنواعاً ومناطق جغرافية واستخدامات أخرى تتجاوز قطاع اللحوم البرية، والتي قد تحتاج إلى إرشادات تكميلية. تجدر الإشارة أيضاً إلى أن هذه المناطق الجديدة لا تقتصر فقط على تلك المذكورة في الفقرة 45 من هذه الوثيقة. على سبيل المثال، يمثل الصيد غير المستدام للطيور المهاجرة بما في ذلك الطيور ذات القيمة المادية العالية تحدياً كبيراً في مناطق الشرق الأوسط، ولهذا السبب نود أن نقترح التعديلات التالية على التوصيات. أولاً، في الفقرة الأولى من التوصية نرى حذف كلمة وخصوصاً وإضافة جملة بما في ذلك ولكن ليس على سبيل الحصر. ثانياً، في الفقرة الأخيرة نرى إضافة جملة وبالتشاور مع الدول الأعضاء بتحديد المجالات والمناطق ذات الأولوية بعد جملة بدعم من الشراكة التعاونية بشأن الإدارة المستدامة للأحياء البرية، وذلك لأهمية استشارة الدول الأعضاء في تحديد الأولويات المتعلقة بالمجالات التي تحتاج إلى إرشادات تكميلية. شكراً سيد الرئيس.
Thank you. Now Belgium, followed by Switzerland.
Dear Mr. Chair, Belgium welcomed the outcomes and findings of the consultative workshop on sustainable wildlife management beyond 2020 and the results of the survey on sustainable wildlife management. We support using these references as initial basis to identify areas beyond the wild meat sector that might require complementary guidance. We would like to request the Executive Secretary to further finalize the list of areas that might require complementary guidance and submit it to COP16 for its consideration. We also support the intervention of Australia regarding the inclusion of subject of availability of resources. Belgium believes that a decision for the preparation of potential further guidance should be taken in coherence with the implementation of the elements in the Kunming-Montreal GBF related to the sustainable wildlife management. Wording to reflect these concerns was already sent to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Switzerland, followed by Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland thanks the Executive Secretary and the Collaborative Partnerships on Sustainable Wildlife Management for the work leading the document 25/11. We note that paragraph 45 of the documents under this item includes area beyond the wild meat sector that might require complementary guidance. In our view, many of the areas listed in paragraph 45 fall to a large extent under the mandates of other organizations and conventions like CITES, CMS, the Ramsar Convention, FAO, ITTO, and others. These areas listed would thus be best addressed in collaborative arrangement established among the conventions and organizations enumerated with the Secretariat of the CBD. In order to avoid duplication of work in these areas, Switzerland suggests requesting the Executive Secretary to bring the list included in paragraph 45 to the attention of the relevant biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant partners with a view of obtaining complementary guidance. Switzerland will send a concrete proposal to reflect this in the draft recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Now, Zimbabwe, followed by UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Zimbabwe notes the document prepared by the Secretariat and fully agrees with what South Africa has presented on behalf of the Africa Group. In addition to the areas identified in the thematic assessment report, which may require the development of complementary guidance in order to achieve sustainable wildlife management, we have some comments and recommendations. One, we recommend to the Conference of the Parties to focus more on strengthening international and domestic institutions, particularly focusing on practical empowerment of IPOCs, like including them in decision-making structures at the possible highest levels, ensuring access to financial resources from biodiversity conservation by communities, especially women and youth. We remain surprised, Mr. Chair, that despite well-documented recognition of the importance of inclusion of IPOCs in conservation, it still remains difficult to establish mutual and financially beneficial linkages between rural communities and international institutions and governments to date. We recommend that the COP mobilize resources towards understanding the values of different local communities to ensure integration into mainstream economies, incorporating indigenous and local knowledge systems into biodiversity conservation strategies, both at international and national levels, as well as addressing in earnest the drivers of over-exploitation, of which poverty is the biggest one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. Now UK, followed by Burundi.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for presenting this document and for their hard work in advancing Decision 1523. We also extend our thanks to the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management for their offer to assist countries in ensuring the legal, sustainable and safe use and trade of wildlife, as well as the other objectives outlined in their 2023 to 2025 work plan. This invaluable support should greatly aid parties in achieving the Global Biodiversity Framework. We are also grateful to the partnership for signalling their availability to undertake the future work as outlined in paragraphs 46 and 47. We welcome the publication of the IPBES thematic assessment on the sustainable use of wild species. This comprehensive assessment fills critical knowledge gaps and will provide a robust evidence base for identifying areas where additional complementary guidance may be required as we move forward. Regarding the recommendation in paragraph 51, we believe the language can be strengthened to be more explicit about the process and timeline for developing further guidance. We propose the following process and timeline: a direct invitation to the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management to undertake the necessary analysis, a request to the Executive Secretary to compile a list of areas requiring additional guidance which draws on the analysis conducted by the Collaborative Partnership. This list would then be submitted to COP16 for parties to consider, as proposed by Belgium. A recommendation that the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting request the Executive Secretary to produce a draft guidance with the support of the Collaborative Partnership and input from other relevant stakeholders, including parties. Finally, a request that the Executive Secretary submit the guidance to a future meeting of SBSTTA in advance of COP17. In addition to clarifying the process and timeline, we also propose that the 7 key elements of effective policy for sustainable use of wild species be taken into consideration in both the analysis conducted by the collaborative partnership and the draft guidance itself. Finally, we recommend that consideration is given as to how to make any future guidance as user-friendly as possible to ensure that there is maximum uptake by parties and other stakeholders. We have submitted these proposed amendments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. Now Burundi, followed by New Zealand.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Burundi soutient la déclaration du groupe africain présentée par l'Afrique du Sud sur l'utilisation et la gestion durable de la faune sauvage. Nous soutenons aussi la proposition d'inclure les espèces qui fournissent des protéines et d'autres utilisations telles que la nourriture, les médicaments, les comestibles, etc. Sans oublier les espèces fournisseurs des services écosystémiques comme les pollinisateurs, mais aussi certaines espèces qui pourraient contribuer à l'économie circulaire en plus des utilisations de la faune sauvage comme viande sauvage. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you for the brief intervention. Now New Zealand, followed by, let me see, because my screen is small, Mexico and Spain.
New Zealand recalls the original intent of the CBD voluntary guidance for a sustainable wild meat sector as addressing the threat of unsustainable harvesting of wild bushmeat in specific geographic regions. We acknowledge the valuable and important work already completed on this agenda item, but want to echo the view of Finland and highlight that developing complementary guidelines for other areas may be more appropriate considered within the wider programme of work review discussed under item 3C. Like Japan, Switzerland, Canada and others, we also want to ensure that the work being undertaken by the CBD is not a duplication of existing work. New Zealand recognises multiple international organisations that have developed standards and work stream for the areas outlined in paragraph 45, and in our view, the focus of the CBD should be considering opportunities to collaborate and add value to these existing work programs across other international fora and to avoid duplication. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Now Mexico, followed by Spain. México.
Gracias, señor presidente. México está a favor de continuar con el desarrollo de guías complementarias que fomenten el uso sustentable de la vida silvestre y trabajar de manera coordinada para priorizar las guías de mayor urgencia y necesidad. En este contexto, es necesario tener las cadenas de valor sólidas para garantizar el reparto de beneficios del uso sustentable de la biodiversidad, asegurando que el uso y comercio de la vida silvestre sea siempre legal, sustentable y trazable. México considera importante no limitarse a un propósito comercial específico. Se requiere también orientación para la recolección, cría en granjas y recolección sustentable de animales en general, por lo que se está a favor de que se continúen los trabajos en la preparación de guías complementarias. Estaremos enviando nuestras observaciones al texto posteriormente de manera escrita. Gracias.
Gracias, México. Ahora tiene la palabra España, seguido de la Federación Rusa.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. España quisiera resaltar las siguientes cuestiones. La lista de áreas que pueden requerir orientaciones adicionales para el uso sostenible de vida silvestre puede estar incompleta y debe ser más precisa, por lo que siempre que se disponga de recursos debería ser terminada por la Secretaría con el apoyo de la Asociación de Colaboración sobre Manejo Sostenible de la Fauna Silvestre, para su consideración y priorización por la COP16, y proponemos que así quede reflejado en el párrafo B de la recomendación. Con relación al párrafo C, se debería pedir a la Secretaría la preparación de orientaciones complementarias para la gestión sostenible de la vida silvestre en aquellas áreas que puedan requerirlo, que a su vez apoyen de manera efectiva el marco global para la biodiversidad. Estas orientaciones complementarias deberán presentarse ante el SBSTTA antes de la COP17. Por último, España considera oportuno incluir en las recomendaciones un nuevo párrafo B bis con los elementos esenciales a tener en cuenta en el desarrollo de políticas que apoyen el uso sostenible de especies silvestres que se enumeran en el párrafo 25 del documento SBSTTA 25/7. Hemos hecho llegar nuestras propuestas de enmiendas concretas por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, España. Ahora doy la palabra a la Federación Rusa, seguido de DRC.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Полагаем очень положительным движением по определению иных задач в области устойчивого управления, что, на наш взгляд, шире, чем только использование диких животных вне тематики исключительно мяса дичи. Приветствуем усилия участников партнерства по устойчивому управлению ресурсами животного мира и анализ информации и выявления пробелов в этой области. Считаем целесообразным продолжить участие КБР в этом партнерстве и совместные усилия по выявлению пробелов, потребностей и подготовке новых руководств. Также хотим выразить благодарность ФАО за усилия по координации и роли секретариата для партнерства. Как уже отмечали целый ряд коллег, мы должны провести дополнительный анализ конкретных уже имеющихся инструментов, в том числе в рамках иных международных процессов. И далее провести приоритизацию, это должны сделать страны, как тоже говорилось, а не секретариат, в том числе среди тех 7 направлений, которые указаны в документе, и в полном соответствии с приоритетами задач глобальной рамочной программы, например, включая и вопрос конфликтов человек-животные, и поднятые здесь вопросы использования животного мира в медицинских целях и так далее. Далее такая работа по анализу и подготовке проектов руководства.
Sorry, Russia. Sorry for interrupting you, but I've been told that there is no translation into Spanish. Can technicians verify that we count with that? So maybe, I don't know for how long.
So what you like
working
me
now? Can you go back a little bit in your statement? I don't know if the whole statement of the Russian Federation was not translated. No hubo traducción al español, toda la intervención de la Federación Rusa. Can you start again, Russia? Apologies, but it was no translation into
Yes,
Spanish.
thank you, Chair. But are you sure translation is there now? That I not do it for 3 times. Okay? Okay. Спасибо, господин председатель. Сначала, хорошо. Прошу прощения у всех за время дополнительное. Еще раз отмечаем положительным то, что наконец в конвенции мы ушли за пределы рассмотрения вопросов только мяса дичи, но и другие области управления животным миром, даже шире, чем только использование. Мы поприветствовали участников партнерства по устойчивому использованию животного мира. Хотим, чтобы КБР продолжало взаимодействие с партнерством, в том числе членство, и совместную работу по выявлению новых приоритетов, подготовке новых руководств и так далее. А также мы выразили нашу благодарность ФАО за усилия по координации и роли секретариата для партнерства. Отметили, что вслед за другими странами хотим, чтобы был проведен дополнительный анализ конкретных имеющихся инструментов, в том числе в практике международных процессов. И среди тех 7 направлений, которые выделены в этом документе, конечно, необходима приоритизация, и эту приоритизацию мы поддерживаем другие страны, должны быть проведена сторонами, а не секретариатом и в полном соответствии и прежде всего для выполнения задач глобальной рамочной программы. Такая работа, конечно, может быть сделана вместе и с партнерством. Приоритизация на сегодняшний день мы можем использовать имеющиеся в конвенции инструменты онлайн, которые нам всем хорошо знакомы, и далее представить на конференцию сторон 16. И в этой части нам понравился целый ряд предложений, сделанных в Великобритании, конкретных шагов, как мы можем двигаться вперед. Учитывая ограниченность ресурсов секретариата, мы полагаем, что работа над такими новыми guidelines может проходить, может быть, в 2-3 этапа, потому что ни 7, ни 8, ни 10 руководств подготовить сразу, я думаю, секретариат и партнерство будут не способны, поэтому мы должны сделать четкую программу, когда и как мы это делаем, кто это делает, и опять-таки здесь предложение Великобритании очень полезно. Ну и последний момент, я хочу всем напомнить нашу дискуссию сегодня по 4-му пункту повестки дня. Мы предлагаем в этом документе, в рекомендациях отметить важность глобальной оценки ИБЭС по устойчивому использованию диких животных. И мы предлагаем параграф 4 из документа 6 целиком перенести сюда и вставить здесь в рекомендации, как ранее было предложено, в частности, Канадой. Мы думаем, что это серьезно усилит документ и придаст вес, в том числе и решениям и результатам ИБЭС, и сделает весь этот документ гораздо более серьезным. Спасибо.
Spasiba, Russia. Now I'll give the floor to Tuvalu, followed by France and Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tuvalu is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries present here at the SBSTTA-25, namely Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, Tonga, and Vanuatu. Mr. Chair, Pacific Island countries are renowned for their rich biodiversity and unique ecosystems, which are home to a wide variety of flora and fauna found nowhere else on Earth. As we gather for the 25th meeting of the SBSTA on the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is imperative to address the critical issue of wildlife management in these countries. Effective wildlife management strategies are essential to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of the region's natural resources, while also considering the socio-economic needs of local communities. Chair, we would like the Secretariat to note the following. 1, we welcome and support the recommendations under CBD/SBSTA/25/11, as well as the thematic assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. 2, Pacific Island countries are often transit points or destinations for illegal wildlife trade due to their biodiversity and proximity to major markets. This trade puts immense pressure on vulnerable species, leading to population declines and ecological imbalances. 3, though the Pacific region does not have a large variety of wildlife, we recognize that species such as terrestrial mammals and plants in the Pacific Islands are facing extinction due to habitat loss, invasive alien species, and climate change impacts. Ocean-bound wildlife is susceptible to environmental threats, especially endemic species that are restricted to a single island or a small group of islands. Among other things, this remoteness makes migrating to another landmass nearly difficult and impossible. Finally, Pacific Island countries often have limited financial resources, technical expertise, and institutional capacity for effective wildlife management. This hampers the implementation of comprehensive conservation strategies, including monitoring, research, and enforcement efforts. We look forward to global financial support for small island states, which would be critical to the success of wildlife management in the Pacific Island countries. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tuvalu. I give the floor to DRC, that was before, and then France and Norway.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole accordée. La République démocratique du Congo soutient très fortement la déclaration faite par l'Afrique du Sud au nom et pour les comptes du groupe africain. Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, c'est la journée mondiale de l'alimentation. La faune sauvage et autres produits forestiers non ligneux constituent pour les populations des pays africains, et particulièrement la RDC, les sources importantes de protéines, mais aussi des revenus. La plupart des ménages dans les régions forestières de la RDC dépendent essentiellement, si pas exclusivement, des espèces sauvages pour leur subsistance et maintiennent des relations profondes, intenses et de longue date avec les espèces sauvages. Ces populations qui vivent de la forêt, dans la forêt et avec la forêt méritent d'être impliquées dans l'identification des sujets et milieux à considérer comme prioritaires et des actions efficaces à mettre en œuvre. Ce faisant, leur pauvreté accrue constitue une menace aux espèces sauvages car ces populations démunies, constituées essentiellement des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales, n'ayant pas de moyens de subsistance alternatifs, considèrent la forêt comme leur supermarché, leur pharmacie, leur lieu de récréation et d'identité culturelle et cultuelle. Promouvoir donc l'utilisation durable des espèces sauvages veut dire promouvoir l'appui à ces communautés à travers l'organisation d'une chasse durable et l'appui en activités alternatives comme l'élevage, l'agriculture durable et écologiquement responsable, ainsi que le petit commerce. Des paragraphes 30 à 35 du document sous analyse, l'exploitation forestière est mentionnée comme une menace à l'utilisation durable des espèces sauvages. Pour y faire face, il convient de développer des énergies nouvelles et renouvelables dans les milieux ruraux qui n'ont pas d'autres sources de revenus. Ces deux aspects susmentionnés, Monsieur le Président, nécessitent d'être pris en compte quand il est question de parler de l'utilisation durable des espèces sauvages. L'Afrique a une large expérience sur cet aspect des choses et les rapports des différents partenaires, dont la FAO, le CIFOR, la WCS et le CIRAD, sont éloquents à cet égard. De ce fait, ils méritent d'être capitalisés. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to France, followed by Norway and Argentina.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France, comme de nombreux autres partis, accueille favorablement l'évaluation thématique sur l'utilisation durable des espèces sauvages de l'IPBES et approuve les messages clés contenus dans cette évaluation et souligne également leur pertinence pour la mise en œuvre du cadre mondial pour la biodiversité de Kunming-Montréal. Ceci étant dit, la France souhaiterait souligner des points inclus dans le document 25/11. Sont listés dans ce document la liste des domaines qui pourraient nécessiter l'élaboration d'orientations complémentaires, sur lesquelles nous avons des commentaires. Par exemple, est listé dans les orientations complémentaires le prélèvement non durable d'animaux terrestres pour le commerce des animaux de compagnie. Sachant que le commerce des animaux de compagnie, qu'il soit légal ou illégal, touche des milliers d'espèces sauvages avec des millions d'individus échangés chaque année et ne se limite pas aux animaux terrestres, nous considérons que l'utilisation du terme terrestre limite de facto le champ de ces orientations en excluant tous les organismes aquatiques et marins concernés par ce commerce. Nous suggérons que le mot terrestre soit remplacé par sauvage. Nous tenons également à souligner l'utilisation répétée de l'expression « dans certaines régions du monde » dans le document, notamment dans l'orientation suivante, la pêche artisanale non durable ou partiellement durable dans certaines régions du monde. Nous questionnons la pertinence de cette précision. Nous appuyons le commentaire de la Turquie concernant l'orientation dont la formulation actuelle est la chasse non durable, en particulier pour les espèces dont le taux intrinsèque d'accroissement de la population est faible et dans les zones où la chasse n'est pas bien gérée. Et nous proposons que ce point soit simplifié à la chasse non durable. L'évaluation de la durabilité de la chasse doit logiquement prendre en compte l'état des populations ainsi que leurs caractéristiques biologiques, parmi lesquelles le taux d'accroissement intrinsèque. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous transmettrons l'ensemble de nos commentaires détaillés par écrit.
Thank you, France. Let's proceed with Norway and Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. Norway would like to express our appreciation for the work of the Secretariat, and we generally support the recommendations of the draft decision. However, in assessing new areas that need complementary guidelines, we would like to support the interventions of Japan, Canada, Australia, and others on avoiding duplication of work. This is particularly relevant in relation to small-scale fisheries and bycatch, where FAO and others have developed guidelines, but also to some other topics. We also support the proposal from the UK and others on including in the guidelines the 7 suggested policy actions to support the sustainable use of wild species from the IPBES assessment. Thank you.
That was brief. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Argentina, followed by last party, Iraq.
Gracias, señor presidente. La Argentina destaca que el uso sostenible de la vida silvestre es una actividad central para la conservación de la biodiversidad y, por lo tanto, para alcanzar la finalidad última del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica y de su Marco Mundial de Kunming-Montreal. Al respecto, la Argentina destaca la reciente publicación de la evaluación sobre uso sostenible de especies silvestres de IPBES y las numerosas recomendaciones realizadas en el resumen de tomadores de decisión. La implementación de las metas del Marco Mundial relativas al uso sostenible deberían realizarse teniendo en cuenta dichas recomendaciones, las cuales, desde nuestra perspectiva, son una guía suficiente para alcanzar la conservación y el uso sostenible de la vida silvestre. En este sentido, distinguidos delegados, la Argentina se pregunta si es realmente necesario establecer un largo proceso de elaboración de numerosas guías adicionales que podrían duplicar el trabajo realizado por IPBES, por la FAO, por CITES y otros. Recomendaríamos no hacerlo y centrarnos en el verdadero desafío de nuestra convención, la implementación del Marco Mundial. Como señalado por otros colegas, como Canadá, Australia, Brasil, Noruega y otros. Por lo tanto, inicialmente, la Argentina no remitirá propuestas de recomendaciones para la COP en este tema de agenda y estudiaremos detalladamente las propuestas realizadas por los distinguidos colegas. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias, Argentina. Doy la palabra a Irak.
تحية طيبة. باختصار شديد أود أن أشير إلى المقرر 14/7 الإدارة المستدامة للحياة البرية، حيث ركز على البعد المحلي فقط ولم يشير إلى الموائمة والأخذ بعين الاعتبار القوائم الحمراء المحلية والعالمية، حيث من الممكن أن يكون أحد الأنواع البرية متوفر بكثرة في دولة معينة ولكنه مهدد بالانقراض على المستوى العالمي، مما يعرض هذه الأحياء لخطر الانقراض على المستوى العالمي نظرا لهشاشة وضعها وقلة أعدادها على المستوى العالمي. لذا يتطلب الأمر إجراء تحليل معمق لهذه المخاطر وأخذها بنظر الاعتبار عند إعداد نهج الإدارة المستدامة للأحياء البرية. وشكرا.
Thank you, Iraq. With this, we finish with requests from parties. Now we will proceed with observers and decide how to proceed. Can I see the list? I'll give the floor to CITES first.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, I have the honour of addressing this plenary on behalf of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management in my capacity as Vice Chair. CPW is a partnership of 13 international organisations with differing but complementary mandates and programmes on the sustainable use of wildlife resources that was established following a decision at CBD COP11. The CPW partners stand ready to continue to support and help strengthen sustainable wildlife management. During our recent annual meeting in Rome, CPW partners approved a work plan for 2023 to 2025, encompassing a diverse range of collaborative initiatives, including those closely associated with CBD processes. These include contributing to a gap analysis to support CBD Decision 15/23, implementation on sustainable wildlife management. Secondly, providing technical support for integrating sustainable wildlife management into NBSAPs. And thirdly, contributing to the development of a methodology for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Sustainable Use of Wild Species Indicator for GBF Targets 5 and 9, and a Human-Wildlife Conflict Indicator for Target 4. We firmly believe that the collaborative efforts among CPW partners in recent years have established a robust foundation to contribute to the work of the CBD, and we look forward to the recommendations relating to sustainable wildlife management emanating from this SBSTTA meeting. In conclusion, we extend a cordial invitation to all parties and observers to join the CPW side event this evening at 18:15 in CR9 Africa Room, and this event will serve as the official launch of our work plan and offer insights into the various activities embedded within it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to FAO, followed by CMS.
Thank you, Chair. This statement refers to paragraph 45 on the need for development of complementary guidance to achieve sustainable wildlife management in specific areas. FAO agrees with the statement made by Japan, Canada, Brazil, and Norway, and reiterates the need to avoid duplication of work, to strengthen complementarities with relevant UN and other regulatory bodies, and to promote focused and coordinated efforts to update existing guidance and create new ones. The GBF offers a great opportunity to enhance synergies across regional and international bodies, including fisheries bodies, farming, and forestry organizations, by investing in communication and implementing globally negotiated agreements and existing tools. These include, for example, guidance for ensuring harvests are sustainable from all fisheries, including small-scale fisheries, while reducing bycatch fishing mortality, and guidance to halt illegal logging practices and enhance sustainable forest management. As mentioned in our statement on document 25/4, FAO will shortly launch a biodiversity knowledge hub with policy and technical tools to assist countries in implementing the framework, including instruments and tools to support sustainable wildlife management. FAO remains at the disposal of the plenary to further contribute to the gap analysis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, FAO. Now I'll give the floor to CMS.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the global agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of migratory species, CMS plays a major role in addressing the management and conservation of wild species of animals and their habitats. We have a long list of mandates, effective practices, and interventions, scientific studies, and guidance that should be brought to bear on this topic for a wide range of species, including avian, aquatic, and terrestrial taxa. For instance, CMS is doing significant work on wild meat, not only on terrestrial wild meat with a global study, but also on taking of avian and aquatic species for wild meat. We will also be launching at our COP14 in February next year the first ever State of the World's Migratory Species Report, prepared with UNEP WCMC. The report has some alarming findings that should be considered in the work of the CBD on this topic. For instance, It finds that 7 in 10 CMS-listed species are affected by overexploitation, 89% of Appendix 1 species and 68% of Appendix 2 species. For terrestrial and avian species, it found that the vast majority of such overexploitation is a result of intentional exploitation. Importantly, much of the taking of CMS species is not for international trade. Over 3/4 of the CMS Appendix 1 taxa were identified as harvested for domestic use. The report goes on to provide clear and pragmatic solutions, and CMS COP14 will be adopting decisions related to these issues. As concluded in the IPBES report on sustainable use, billions of people rely and benefit from the use of wild species of plants and animals, but it also found that overexploitation is one of the greatest threats to wild species. Thus, identifying and enhancing the conditions that need to be in place to ensure that taking is legal and sustainable are key to reversing these trends. We stand ready to work with the CBD and other entities on guidance as well as other measures to ensure that targets 4, 5, and 9 of the KMGBF are achieved. We will be discussing these and other issues tomorrow at a lunchtime side event that I invite you to attend, and I also hope to see many of you at COP14. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. I'll give the floor to Peru.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. El Perú reconoce los esfuerzos de la Secretaría en brindarnos el presente documento para lograr el cumplimiento de la decisión 14.7 y la decisión 15.23, tomando en consideración las conclusiones del informe consultivo sobre la gestión sostenible de la fauna y flora silvestre después del 2020 y los resultados de la encuesta sobre el tema. Los puntos más resaltantes para Perú son los siguientes. Sobre el inciso C, el Perú está conforme, ya que definitivamente para lograr la recomendación, los países requerimos fondos para generar información actualizada y permanente, y sugiero promover que las plataformas internacionales especializadas en el tema compartan información existente mediante los estándares de intercambio de información. En cuanto al inciso D, el Perú hace un llamado a afianzar la articulación entre actores pertinentes a fin de asistir y fortalecer a los países sobre la gestión de la flora y fauna silvestre de una manera mucho más efectiva. Finalmente, Perú está conforme con la recomendación del presente documento e informamos que venimos trabajando en la mejora de los marcos normativos, con aquellos que se refieren específicamente a la gestión sostenible de la fauna y flora silvestre, con los objetivos AB, metas 4, 5 y 9, a fin de trabajar su mejora continua y verse reflejado en los instrumentos nacionales. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Peru. I still have 4 requests from observers. I will invite them to take only 2 minutes in order to finish. We have very little time and we have not addressed yet the last document. So that means we will need to have a plenary tomorrow. And this is against the time available for contact groups. Please be very precise. I'll give the floor to IPLCs, followed by women and NGO 195.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. IIFB is mindful on the reciprocal relationship between nature and people, making sustainable wildlife management an important priority for indigenous peoples and local communities. Actions taken on sustainable wildlife management must respect and support customary sustainable use of wildlife by indigenous peoples and local communities. In this regard, IIFB proposes the addition of the following words at the end of paragraph 51C to read, recommend to the Conference of Parties to request that the Executive Secretary, with the support of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, to prepare draft complementary guidance on those areas, adding, ensuring respect and support for customary sustainable use on wildlife by indigenous peoples and local communities. IFB requests parties for support in this recommendation. IFB have submitted these recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any party supporting the suggestion? Please raise your hand. I don't see any party. Thank you. Now I'll give the floor Representative Women.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Joyce Peshu from Kenya, speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. In the realm of sustainable wildlife management, it is paramount to acknowledge that gender issues are frequently overlooked or insufficiently addressed, even with the community-driven efforts. We must recognize that these gender dimensions are pivotal and their neglect can undermine the very essence of effective wildlife management. For that, we urge parties to ensure reference on gender consideration in the governance of wild species, with a particular focus on the distribution of costs and benefits in line with targets 22 and 23 of the framework. Since billions of people around the planet rely on and benefit from the use of wild species, with a particular focus of indigenous people, local communities, and women, it is critical to include a gender dimension in tackling critical challenges on sustainable wildlife management. Including human-wildlife conflict, unsustainable and illegal trade, tenure rights, poverty, and food security, recognizing their diverse impacts on women and girls, and the potential to perpetuate gender inequalities that require attention and resolution. In this context, our concrete recommendations on these items are: in Section 3, areas that might require complementary guidance, para 45, to add a new subpara H that reads as follows: integrate gender-responsive approaches by recognizing and supporting the roles, rights, needs, and contributions of women, particularly in activities such as the collection, processing, and trade of wild species. Following, in para 46, to add women, youth, and other stakeholders after indigenous peoples and local communities. Additionally, we want to bring your attentions to the urgence of the recognition and acknowledgement of women among other constituents as custodians of biodiversity and partners in its conservation, restoration, and sustainable use, as well as the fact that women and girls rely on sustainable use of wild species in most cases. Underscore the collection of gender disaggregated data is a pivotal step towards integrating
Please
gender
conclude
consideration
and go straight to your suggestion, please.
into wildlife management. We kindly request the Chair to ask the parties to support our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any party supporting suggestion by Representative Women? I see one hand, Cameroon. Thank you. Now, 2 minutes for NGO 195. Last NGO 191.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of China Biodiversity Conservation Green Development Foundation. I would like to remind all of the parties that whilst we've heard about sustainable wildlife management in the context of wild meat, this is missing the fact that many species are traded for other purposes, including ornamentation, fashion, and for the pet trade, and many of these fall outside the scope of any of the UN conventions. For example, if we consider the case of reptiles, nearly 37% of species are in trade, and yet only 9% fall under the CITES Convention. For amphibians, 17% are in trade, 2.5% fall within any of the CITES appendices. It is paramount, as illustrated by IPBES, that we consider the sustainable trade of all species, rather than those that fall within the remits of existing conventions, and yet, with the exception of America, only Australia and America are countries that currently database the import and export of species that fall outside CITES appendices. Without data on the trade of species, we cannot measure the sustainability. And so we would encourage all parties to think of more standardized ways to database the export and import of species in trade so we can develop sustainable baselines. Lastly, there is no binary indicator for Target 5, and the only headline indicator is fish stocks, meaning that for the majority of species in trade, we have no headline indicator to understand the impact of trade on species. And this is paramount to the conservation of species that are currently impacted by unsustainable trade, but for which we have no data to ascertain what that impact looks like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ya había cerrado la lista, pero Colombia ha solicitado la palabra. Por favor, sea breve.
Gracias, presidente. Solo para decir que Colombia apoya la propuesta de los pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales y de mujeres.
Gracias, sí, ya tenía apoyo. Bueno, con esto hemos terminado nuestras deliberaciones sobre este documento. Hay muchos comentarios sobre el documento, varios apoyando el reconocimiento a la evaluación de IPBES, también algunas de las acciones que propone esta evaluación. Mucha discusión sobre las acciones complementarias en cuanto a las orientaciones adicionales sobre el manejo de vida silvestre. Muchos llamados de atención para evitar duplicidades, especialmente con trabajo que ya existe por otras organizaciones como la FAO o la CITES. Algunas recomendaciones concretas para filtrar las recomendaciones y continuar trabajando y presentar algo de esto en la próxima reunión de SBSTTA antes de la COP. Recordemos el enfoque, por un lado, para evitar la sobreexplotación, pero por otro lado, para fomentar la sustentabilidad del uso de la vida silvestre. En fin, son muchos los comentarios recibidos. Voy a solicitar a la Secretaría que trabajemos en la elaboración de un documento CRP que trate de reflejar la mayor parte de sus comentarios para tener una base integrada y continuar con nuestras deliberaciones en la mejor forma de continuar nuestro trabajo. Nos quedan muy pocos minutos. Si podemos quedarnos un poquito, unos 10 minutos más, me gustaría al menos poder presentar el documento sobre cambio climático. Entonces, con esto pasamos al siguiente tema y doy la palabra a la Secretaría para el tema 7 de la agenda sobre biodiversidad y cambio climático. Ahora hablaré en inglés, sorry, my notes are in English. Given that UNEA, UNEA mandated consultations on nature-based solutions, recently concluded its final meeting here last week, and the topic is relevant to, while not limited to, this is very important, to item 7 on biodiversity and climate change. I would like to invite one of the co-chairs of the consultations to give a brief overview of the process to our information. So I will give the floor to Ms. Sikeade Ekbuwalo of Nigeria. Is she around? She requests to. So please. Yeah, she's going to the seat of Nigeria. Microphone to Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good day to you all. distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. You may recall the 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly held in February 2022 in Nairobi adopted the resolution 5/5 on 2nd of March 2022, which is on nature-based solutions for supporting sustainable development. The resolution provides the first multilaterally agreed definition on nature-based solutions as actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystems, which address social, economic, and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being, ecosystem services, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. It also requested the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme to convene intergovernmental consultations to further support implementations of nature-based solutions as defined in the resolution. In October 2022, Dr. Leila Benali, the President of the United Nations Environment Assembly, appointed Her Excellency Mrs. Giovanna Valverde Stark, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to UNEP and UN Habitat, and I as the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Consultations on Nature-Based Solutions. These consultations were convened between May and October this year, with the final in-person consultations concluding this past Friday. The co-chairs have developed draft recommendations for progressing nature-based solutions and are currently writing a co-chair summary which will reflect the full range of views expressed in the consultations, including divergencies and diversity of all opinions. We will also reflect the rich information from the regional consultations in the co-chair summary. We have heard hundreds of views expressed during these consultations. There is general consensus on the importance and value of nature-based solutions and the importance of social and environmental safeguards, recognizing the rights and interests of indigenous peoples, and on measuring costs and benefits, including non-economic costs and benefits. We have also heard that there is a need for greater clarity on standards and criteria. This is needed for several reasons, including to identify good or best practices. We recognize the importance of placing nature-based solutions in the context of sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, and this will be reflected in the written outcomes of these consultations. In order to establish a consistent and common understanding of nature-based solutions across the multilateral environmental agreement, we are recommending that parties to the various agreements which use the concept or term nature-based solutions consider ways to promote coordination in their approaches to this topic, including synergizing efforts being taken under different bodies/agreements. We look forward to working with you all on this important topic. Once again, my gratitude to SBSTTA Chair for the opportunity to give a reflection on the process of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions. I thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, this is considering that this topic is relevant, while it's not limited to what we're going to be dealing with climate change, but to be aware of the consultations last week here in Nairobi. Now I'll like to give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce item 7. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. COP Decision 15/30 requests the SBSTTA to further review the issue of biodiversity and climate change on the basis of views and information submitted by parties, other governments and international organisations, as well as relevant scientific and technical information on biodiversity and climate change. On item 7, the Secretariat has prepared document SBSTTA/25/12 Biodiversity and Climate Change, This document contains a brief summary of the submissions and views and information, and the subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in document 25/12. In addition, the subsidiary body has before it an information document related to this agenda item, CBD/Substa/25/INF/2, which contains a more comprehensive synthesis of the views and information received on biodiversity and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For this, just give me a second to have a quick consultation in how to proceed. Thank you very much for your time. So we will finish our deliberations now, and I'd like to remind you that for this evening, the contact group on the monitoring framework on 3A will start at 7:30 until 11. Please remind that if you leave the venue, you can come back to the venue only until 8 p.m., but not after. If you go to get dinner, you should come before. Otherwise, you will not be able to enter into the venue until 11. And the idea, well, the non-paper, as you know, is already published. That will be the basis for deliberations. And tomorrow morning, we will start also with 2 contact groups, one on invasive species and the other one on monitoring, planning, and reporting. And regarding when we will reconvene the plenary to continue with climate change, we will let you know if we'll be in the afternoon or later, so look at the screens, because we need to arrange logistical considerations. We were expecting to finish today to do full day tomorrow for contact groups, but I'm sure there's going to be a number of interventions that will take some time. So please be aware of the screens, but at least the works for tonight, for this evening, and tomorrow morning are clear. We need to start our work on the contact groups as soon as possible. I don't know if Secretary has any additional comments.
Thank you, Chair. Please be informed that the contact group, which was going to be held at CR1, is now going to be held in CR3 and 4 combined room, so just next door. And for tomorrow, it will take place at CR1 as originally allocated, but please also be informed that the non-paper, which was issued this afternoon as version 1, will have to issue within next 1 hour, next 5 minutes as a version 2, because we missed some important information. So we apologize for this inconvenience, but please download version 2 for tomorrow's contact group. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on an entirely different issue, as you know, this meeting will be followed by the meeting of the resumed COP and MOPS. to complete the elections and to to adopt the report, formally adopt the reports of COP15, MOP10 and MOP4. To do this, of course, we need a full quorum. Actually, we've had very good cooperation of parties in providing their credentials, but there are still some parties that need to either get their credentials or a note verbal validating the credentials that were available in Montreal. My colleagues have been chasing individual countries in this respect, but let me just also urge those parties that have not yet completed the process of getting their credentials or their note verbal to do so that we can proceed smoothly on Thursday afternoon with those meetings. Of course, a full report on credentials will be made available at the beginning of the COP on Thursday, and the Bureau will be meeting, the COP Bureau will be meeting Thursday morning to prepare that report. So I'm just seeking your cooperation in that. If there are any questions, then my colleagues Worku and Inonge are available to address them. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. So the meeting is adjourned.